Hello, everyone. Let's see. Is this working? Is this working? It's always a question. Is it working? Hello. So, hello. Hello, Frank Savano. That's an interesting question. Oh, I'm going to make sure it's on live chat so I can follow everyone and quickly chat to everyone. And hopefully, it's now working. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Frank Sasato. Hello, Daniel Freeman. Thank you for being watching, Dan. It's always useful to have one of the admins along. Hello, Tinu Locker. And oh no, and good evening, everyone. Hello, Rick Vasala. Hello, Calvin Asway. Hello, DGB40. Before anyone asks, yes, this is being sent over Wi-Fi, so I have no idea how good it is or not. And yes, I do have a plastic champagne flute of some kind for my iron brew. The joys of research trips. No, it's a lovely place I'm staying. Just maybe not quite up to date with modern standards of technology. Hello, Bug Guy 8829. Hello, Jack Hunter. Thanks for that. Where in the UK do most admirals and generals come from? Any foreign ones? Ex-Australia, India, Pakistan, Canada. Occasionally you find Australian, Canadian, etc. getting up there, especially in the sort of the pre-1950s Navy. It's kind of a broad mix. However, there does seem to be a fairly large concentration of West Country people in the senior ranks of the Navy. They tend to come from the western side of the country, so either the southwest or the northwest. They seem to be. They're from all over, but those are. If you've got a group of 10 or 12 admirals in a room, I would say normally 6 of them will come from the west of the country, and the rest will come from Scotland, Midlands, and the southeast, and Wales, etc. So I have no idea why. Michael Clapp, of course, is Devonian / Cornish / all sorts of things, and it's just an area where they seem to pop up from. Right. I literally arrived in these quarters not that long ago, so it's a setup. I hope the research assistants have been behaving well. The research assistants are always very good, as far as I know. 5x5. Thank you, Team Locker. Hello, Seneca Luca. Hello, Dirt Squad. Wayne Boring. Oh, yes, we can hear and see you. The rest of Dad and Shed. Who are you? What are you done with, Alex? I've got Iron Brew. Not a shed now. This is more a shrine to a very pretty fishing village, judging by the pictures on the wall, who all pictures painted by a lady called Elizabeth Clark, spelt the same way my name's spelt. Might give you a clue as to why I'm here. Hello. Fine feed so far. Frank Sputter, what did the dead of FDR do to change events of World War II? If Churchill was no longer PM in 43, who would have been PM? Honestly, the person who you'd want to be PM would probably be the Labour Prime Minister who comes after him, because there isn't really a good Conservative candidate. It would probably have been Anthony Eden. Maybe Halifax. Either way, not exactly the most enlightening souls to run a country. No, neither of them are that great. I'm down here for a research trip, and helping out that way. Almost forgot. So, reason I'm wearing this hat is because I don't trust to put this a screen up on this yet. I'm going to try and have a far more solid connection when I do Thursdays live. But yes, I think Atlee was. But as you all know, there is currently a bet going with my lovely aunt, who has said if I get to 13,000 subscribers by the 31st of December 2021, she and my uncle will be pictured wearing face masks with Blackburn on, which you can buy along with stuff like this and everything but the HMS Unicorn one, which still hasn't got through apparently. From the Spreadshirt site, link to down below. And yes, there is the other added bonus of advertising that is, of course, as I said last time, currently I am technically unemployed because of the joys of the academic payment system. I.e., if you're a contract lecturer in certain universities, some of them the biggest ones, so they can get out of certain statutory employment law requirements, they technically fire you from July, to either the end of September or the end of October, depending on which university they are. It's a good hat. Iron Brew looks like radioactive champagne. Let's hold it up to the light and see what happens. Yes. Yes, it is. Glorious. Are you across from the Iron Brew Factory? Nope. The FRA. There is certainly an FRA wanting to be involved. Certainly an FRA would like to be involved. Didn't Churchill write a letter to King George VI suggesting who should be asked to take over as PM if he died? Probably, but more than likely, knowing Churchill, it was a case of, please, whatever you do, ask Keyes, ask anyone. Do not ask anyone from my party. They're all idiots. So, one thing, though, before I do get into too much Bruships, I'm going to actually mention a book, because this has just arrived, Total Germany by David Drake. The Royal Navy's War Against Axis Powers, 1939 to 1945. Now, I'm going to say one little thing. I like it, and I've only managed to skim read it. I haven't read it properly yet. I do like it. And these things always come to me with various things. But the point I find interesting, and I have made this point on many occasions, is that Britain had to plan to fight 3 nations, and it could have ended up fighting any of those 3. And the fact it ended up fighting all 3 was frankly a nightmare scenario. But it had picked out 3 nations as its most likely adversaries. And that meant it has to build to fight any of them. The amount of books, and this one doesn't seem to be that bad on it, but there are so many others which are, and this one has a couple of bits which I'm sort of going, really? That seemed to think like Britain was solely focused, or should have been solely focused on Germany. They couldn't be. They couldn't. Ben Grogan, hello. You mentioned in a previous video on delaying costs of the Queen Elizabeth class. Could you expand? I was under the impression it was delays due to constantly changing email decisions. No, actually, at one point, Gordon Brown is actually paying them not to build them so that they delay their construction. The Air Carrier Alliance ends up getting paid oodles and oodles amounts to delay them, and the fact to a slow production, etc., because it was incredibly inefficient to produce them as slowly as they were built. They could have actually been churned out a lot quicker. And as I said, you could have built 3 for that cost in that time, but they didn't. And there was a bit of a and over the emails decision, but that really didn't slow up Queen Elizabeth. That more had an effect on Prince of Wales. And honestly, that whilst there was a political different decision making and arguments going on over that actually didn't affect the construction of the yards. The construction of the yards hadn't reached the point at which it mattered yet. That was the point. They were having that debate before it got to the point at which they had to make a decision for it. It was actually a timely time to have the debate. It was stupid to have the debate, as I've been over before. Because for Britain, the sensible thing is not to have emails. The sensible thing is to go F-35B and helicopters and to churn out some LHDs as well. Because at that time, emails required a significantly large enough amount of power. It's very interesting. They've got emails to work, but they haven't got railguns to work. One almost wonders whether they were using railguns as the cover to make sure enough technology, enough research was done to make emails work, but they weren't really fussed about it, railguns. Team Looker, what if the Royal Australian Navy was better equipped and manned before the Japanese entry into the war? Would the Japanese advance in the Far East have been slow significant? How much better manned? If Australia has a fully functioning carrier force and battleship force of, I don't know, or battle force of, let's say, 3 Hood-style battle cruisers, and 3 Admiral class sort of level aircraft carriers, as I've sort of talked about before. Yeah, that's going to slow them down because that's a major force. But if they've got more destroyers, it'll have an impact. But will it really slow them down significantly? Who knows? That's the problem. The amount Australia would have had to invest in. Interesting discussion is when you start to get onto things like sloops. It's when you start to look at those sort of things that actually could have had a big impact. Because let's put it this way: if the Royal Navy and Britain is getting Commonwealth partners in itself to build sloops from 1928 onwards, they're churning out a flotilla for Britain and a flotilla, a couple of flotillas for Britain, let's say 18, and 18 between Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, and South Africa. Who knows how many each? A year. From 1928 onwards. Then you have a huge number of sloops available, which of course you can do on the treaty system, and they are the same size as destroyers, just they're limited to top speed of 20 knots, and they can't have torpedoes and all these things, but they can be roughly the same size as destroyers, so they can be 1,500 to 1,800 tons, quite happily, even 2,000. So you could design them for long-range naval work patrols. That would free up destroyers, for starters, from escorting convoys, a lot of destroyers from a convoy escort. It would also mean that there was a lot more anti-submarine work going on. With more destroyers for escort work, you might have been less likely to lose Courageous and Ark Royal. You might have therefore had more been able to deploy carriers with Force Z, which might have had an impact. You can, with very small forces, make an impact on World War II, but it's a lot of what-ifs going forward. Electromagnetic assisted launch system, otherwise known as the Raven and steam catapults, which they use for carriers, for the Catabar system. That's the catapult assisted takeoff and barrier assisted recovery aircraft launch method from the aircraft carriers. They use electric ones. New IKB 472. Do you think that the Burma Road could be upgraded to a railway? Roads in Burma are 1 meter gauge. I would intend to use engineers from logging railroads on the US West Coast. They could probably have done that. I think the Burma Road, there are lots of things in railways which could have been done to make Malaysia and etc. Singapore far stronger. Wayne Boring, book name again, please. Total Germany. The Royal Navy's War Against the Axis Powers, 1939 to 1945 by David Reich. I'll put a link in below, but also there will be a book or two to review coming up about it. I'll record it while I'm wandering. Frank Spazzato, why did Langsdorff end his life after he scuttled a grass spear? Fear of reprisal? Tradition? Probably. A bit of both. Also guilt. And maybe he could see how the war was going and he didn't want to play further part in it. Because he knew would he get back home? Is the Graf Spee the only ship self-destructed because of a ruse? Not really. I can't think of names of them off the top of my head, but I'm fairly sure there have been other ships which have, over the years, decided that life was better to not be captured by the enemy, because they believed the enemy were coming when they weren't. The Royal Navy might have even had a couple actually from memory, but I cannot remember names off the top of my head. I'm completely blank, and I don't have my big book of ship losses with me. Sorry. It would seem to be that of the three possible enemies navally, Germany would be the least threatening. They can cause problems, but can't cut UK off from the rest of the empire. Pretty much, to fight Japan requires you deploy a full fleet to the other side of the world, which is going to be infrastructure and logistical nightmare. Italy sits bestride the Mediterranean, and Germany's got barely anything in the early 1930s. Yes, Germany builds up, but the other point I often make is I ask people go through those scenarios and ask them which scenario requires you a massed ASW convoy force. And you sit there and you look at you and go, Japan? Why? They're in the Pacific. You block them off with Singapore. They're going to send submarines through the Panama Canal. The Americans are going to allow that? Nope. So are they going to send submarines around the South Atlantic and past the Falkland Islands? Well, if the submarine's still alive by the time it reaches the Falkland Islands, I'm sure the Royal Navy would be happy to take it prisoner when it wants to surrender, because it'll be feeling very seasick by that point, and probably running low on supplies and fuel. Okay, next option. So that's not going to be the case. Okay, Italy. Well, the trade will have to go round Africa, but you pretty much cut it off with Gibraltar and Alexandria, and then squeeze it in the middle. So the only nation which you could, in theory, have a convoy war against would be Germany. But if you think about that, in the wildest dreams of anyone in the 1930s, if you turn around to them and say, oh, by the way, Germany's going to succeed in not only taking Norway, they're also going to take France, they'd have laughed at you as if you were insane. Book name again, please. I think I said that, but Total Germany by David Ragg. Total Germany. Imagine the Romans with electromagnetic catapults for giant rocks. That's terrible. Seneca Nero, what would modern destroyers and frigates, European style, be classified as in the treaty system? Probably light cruisers. Most of them are orbiting roughly the 6,000-ton region. They're all definitely heavier than destroyers. Destroyers had a maximum ceiling of in effect, 1,500 tons. Apart from if they were destroyer leaders, which were 1,850. So, in the nicest way, if they're less than 10,000 tons, probably light cruisers, considering none of them are carrying 8-inch guns. So, probably light cruisers. VMAS equals like excessive stress inducing until bugs are fixed. Bad Guy 8829. If one of the three, US, UK, and Russia, main European allies, wasn't involved with the war against Germany, could Germany still be defeated with just the other two? Germany's going to lose any war that involves the US and the UK. The US or the UK, really. Economically, the UK can just keep fighting a war a lot longer than the Germans can. I think if you have Russia and US versus Germany, they still win. UK and Russia versus Germany, they still win. UK and US versus Germany, they still win. There isn't really many options for Germany at that point. Hello to Strike 616. Graham, one was the one that slipped sturdy. It scuttled itself, and wasn't Canaris involved in that? I think possibly. I know I have his book with me somewhere. Is it that one or that one? That one. Yeah. Oh, Canaris. The Life and Death of Hitler's Spy Master. That, again, is going to be in a book or two to review. Frank Spanner, US Marines always face getting completely cut off. Does this ever happen to a UK military branch? The Royal Marines, the Royal Navy beach landing parties, quite a large section of the British military, the parachute regiment, of course. I think most parachute units figure out they could get cut off completely. They famously got cut off during the Operation Market Garden. So yes, a few branches often think about getting cut off. Probably the 101st US Airborne does as well. That's good. Taking a submarine through the Drake Passage would be interesting. Modern nuclear submarine, I wouldn't mind doing it. I'd be fine. I'd be underwater. I'm thinking about the strength of the underwater currents. I think you might not make it. I'm thinking being on the surface with waves that big could be very interesting. I just, I'm not sure there's any good idea for a submarine going there. Thank you. On the subject of those delays on the queue again, trying to think of some form of logic behind that. How many ships would the RN need to gain for supporting a third QE, including logistics? If you were going up to 3 Queen Elizabeths, well, we had a plan for 3 Queen Elizabeths. Why do you think originally the plan was to buy 9 and later they settled on a minimum number of 9 or 8 to 9 Type 45s? Basically, take the existing fleet and roughly add 50% onto the destroyer numbers, add 3 onto the frigate numbers to get up to 16. So basically, you need about 9 Type 45s and 16 to 18 frigates to be able to maintain 3 carriers. That was the plan then. Nowadays, they might say they actually need more, because remember, those plans were written when the idea was, wars were over! The Cold War's finished! No one's going to have to fight a war they don't choose to ever again! Yay, that worked out so well. What laughs is that survived even after the Twin Towers attack. Because in what way did America choose to go into Afghanistan or in anything like that? They were attacked. They responded. The only way they could respond was either flatten there with bombs, but that wasn't really going to work because the people would just disappear. So the only way to stop it was to go in. So the Americans had a choice of just leaving it there and leaving it to continue to attack them, or actually going in. Ouch, that's a painful one. Dan Freeman. Oh, yeah. Oh, Wayne Boring. Oh, wow. Just stumbled across the Royal Navy Handbook, 1939 to 1945. It is a good book. I think I've done a review on that one. Barry Freeman. Re-hydrating submarine in the Atlantic. I see Japanese submersible torpedo boats in North Sea. Totally not the Grimsby fishing fleet. Potentially. So, what would the age of steam and steel look like if gunpowder was invented? Probably a lot more ramming. Rather an interesting idea. If you have steam and steel but you don't have gunpowder, it's probably ramming, iron spikes, maybe boarding. Some very interesting boarding mechanisms. And interesting enough, you probably have some very, very big mechanical crossbows. Because you think about it, if you don't have steam, if you don't have gunpowder, you could potentially using steam, have a steam powered sort of a winch mechanism on a crossbow type system that could fire an impressively massive dart. That would be probably what we would have ended up with at some point. Although the British would probably also have rapid fire machine gun version of the longbow as well. So you'd have sort of massed banks of steam powered, somehow mechanical longbows for close range, with just a sea of arrows going everywhere, something like that. The Legolas system that the very, very interesting gentleman came up with for the Crossbow channel, I think it was, or Slingshot channel, always forget. But I watch him occasionally, and he's got the automatic Legolas, and that's really, really cool. But that sort of system on a longbow for rapid fire, and then some, as I said, huge, massive steam-powered crossbows. Watching Drax in 55 minutes. Watching Drax video on HMS Excellent had me wondering how much of other recent battles would other ships' crew know about across the Navy. They might know a bit. Mostly, you'll probably find more will know in the officers and the chiefs than the lower crew. And saying that because the officers and chiefs probably have the professional connections across the Navy, so they'll be getting communications from each other. Whereas the sailors, especially recently joined ones, might not have those connections. That's what. Now, that's luck. I think, again, against any of the three alone, Germany loses. It'll be lot more bloody, but Germany was always on the edge of economic collapse, using war spoils to fund the next war. And often using war spoils to actually provide the equipment for the next war. Hello, Shimmy. Richard Otter. World War I Treaty. No tonnage limit to converted carriers if hull was laid 1880 to 90. What ships do you expect to be converted first by nations with carriers? What other nations may get it in a carriage? Oh, good lord. I suppose if there's any pre-dreadnoughts going around. Oh, God, what would I... Yeah, you know someone's going to try it, but I can't think of... Some of the armored cruisers, maybe, because they were slightly faster than the pre-dreadnought battleships. But you see, converting a dreadnought is possible. They're long enough and fast enough. Converting a pre-dread. The thing is, there are some nations which might not try. The Royal Navy might go, frankly, we have enough carriers, we ain't going to bother about that one. The Japanese and the Americans are the ones who would try, and let's see. Unfortunately, the pre-dread USS Texas has long gone by that point. I don't know. Honestly, it's probably got to be some armored cruisers, and whichever ones are in the best condition is going to be the first results. Whichever ones can actually work. But it'd be interesting. It'd be really very interesting. Thanks for the Dr. C. Can we say hello, Governor? Mm. So, you can still have TNT and stuff. Yeah, but you see, that's not going to take much advantage of the steam. The TNT you might want to use, and explosives you might want to use for various things, but gunpowder is really the first proper explosive. USS Vesuvius. Steam guns. Steam torpedoes that just aim to poke a hole in the ship below the water? Potentially. Matthew Electric, if no gunpowder, would you still get the pneumatic gun? Potentially, but it's quite difficult. Those aren't really that reliable, and as are neither are the TNT explosive guns. As I said, I think navies, especially for long range fire, would be going for a form of mechanical crossbow. John Shane, even the IJN sent I-400s from Japan to the west coast of Africa via the southern point, i.e. the Cape of Good Hope. Just getting past that is insane, let alone getting to the Atlantic. Yeah. Hello, Darren Thatcher. Hello, Vice Admiral Nelson. There's a question, I think, somewhere around here about alchemy. I'm not sure if I missed it. I'm going to Bridge Orbit, steam-powered crossbow. Now, I don't want that. That I want to see. That's something actually I think me and Drag once talked about, and we're actually theorizing how to do it for some random reason. I'm not sure why. I think it was me and Drag. It might have, he's the most likely of my friends to have that conversation with. It would depend on whether alchemy turns into chemistry at some point, and people how to work out in a more scientific way how to achieve rapid conjunction and achieve pressure changes, or if you can actually turn base metals into gold. In which case, whichever country manages to have access to the most base metals will probably become very, very rich very quickly. I mean, anything that wasn't developed out of gunpowder was exist. Dynamite was originally developed as a heart medicine. Yes. In some parts of the world, believe it or not, it's still occasionally prescribed. Or at least that's what I was told by a very, very random doctor from Africa. Wayne Boren, the new Royal Australian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, and Royal Navy Type 26 Dreadnoughts come in at over 9,000 tons. They are bigger than most cruisers were, and the RCN one is amazingly rounded design. Yes, so they are. This is going to sound strange. They'd still be light cruisers though under that treaty limit because they don't have bigger than 6-inch guns. If they had 8-inch guns, they'd be heavy cruisers. Because remember, a cruiser was any vessel up to 10,000 tons. Anything over 10,000 tons starts to count for your treaty allowance, your capital ship allowance. So by that count, I think Zumwalts and Zumwalts are definitely in the battle cruiser range by those treaties. Frank's one, how does history change if alchemy worked? Found that question. It depends how rich some countries get. That sounds really, really random to say, but it really does depend how rich they get. The richer they are, the more likely they are to start having wars and win them. But 829, how much of an impact would the Worcester and Des Moines class have if they are in service in 1942? How many of them are in service? If there's one or two, not much. If there's half a dozen of each, and let's say they all happen to be in the Western Pacific for ABDA command, and so the US are in charge of the ABDA forces, then that's quite a scary group for the Japanese to deal with. This is the point. If you have enough of those ships in the service that they can make an impact, they're probably going to be in places like Hawaii with the main fleet, in which case they're probably very useful for protecting things like the carrier operations. So they provide the carriers with a huge amount of firepower and escorts, or they provide cruisers which can support night actions or day actions, and they're useful ships. This is the point. Useful ships will always have an impact. The question is, if you have just one more ship, that's probably not going to be much of an impact. If you have half a dozen, i.e. 6 of each, then that's going to be an impact. If you have a couple of dozen of each, then that's a massive impact. General Fashion, I heard that Britain paid compensation to the US in the 1868. They were scared of getting into war with both US and Prussia and couldn't win against both. Is that true? No. I'm not sure who's told you that, but no. In in the nicest way, Prussia had no navy to count off, so the British really weren't worried about Prussia. They had a small bit, but it was so small they really didn't care. And mostly Prussia was an ally. And as for America in 1860s, well, America's just been through the US Civil War. In fact, I think they're still going at the US Civil War, and frankly, whilst there might have been some lovely ideas by Seward that a foreign war would unite the whole of the Confederate States and the Northern states together, the last thing the Northern state the Union forces wanted was to have a war with the British, because if anyone could have lasted through their blockade on the Southern states, it would have been the British. And the first thing, if there had been a war between us and America, we would have been break the blockade and start making sure the South gets a massive amount of supplies. Because the easiest way to break it would be to break America would just be fix the problems for the South, and you could fix the South's logistical problems and communication problems with the Royal Navy. Because as much as the US Navy was lovely, the Royal Navy had HMS Warrior and several other sisters who could have pretty much blasted anything the US Navy had apart. And then that's if they just didn't bother to just run through it. As I've been over before, whenever they talk about Monitor versus Warrior, and it's in books, they have to come with some interesting scenario whereby Warrior is caught unable to maneuver and close inshore. Because if she's out at sea, the sea probably takes out Monitor before she does. And if she's anywhere she can maneuver, she can go a lot faster. That's what. No, so it doesn't matter if I keep the keel of an armor cruiser and add to it, so I end up with something like an SS class. That is pretty much what you would have to do. You basically have to do. In fact, the only way you could really make an aircraft carrier from a pre-dreadnought ship is one of those classic Royal Navy Chatham long rebuilds, deep refits. You know, the ones where they take off pretty much the whole wooden ship completely apart and put it back together again, just replacing every piece of wood which looks into even the slightest bit dodgy, and so pretty much build a brand new ship. That is what they would have to do. At which point it would probably gain turbines and small tube boilers and all sorts of things. So yes, the Royal Navy would probably happily rebuild every single pre-dreadnought they still had in service, just for the hell of it. Emails was a totally flustered clock. Who in the US then approved a 4 catapult system where the whole system goes down when any single catapult goes Tango Sierra? Should be shot. They should have done it so it's an individual system, yes. Hello, Busha Buddha. I knew I could be forceful to do. How many pre-dreads would you have to raft together to get a worthwhile flight deck and hangar? At least 2 in length. You're Patrick. Compensation for building Confederate ships in Liverpool, for those who don't know. No, they didn't give them any compensation. And they bought those ships for the Royal Navy. There were many, many issues about those ships, but at no point were the British really that worried about them. They kept an eye on them, and they weren't. At no point were they supposed to be for the Confederates. They remember they were supposed to be bought for the Egyptians. That was their cover. And the moment there was any suspicion, the British just bought them. They have ended up as 2 steam rams in the RN service. I've done a video, I think, where I discussed them. Were there any heavy lift ships in World War II, like what carried USS Cole and Sisters back to the US? Not really. They're all newer ships to those systems. There are ships which do that with lighter vessels, and there is the fact there's an entire class of landing craft which basically carry other landing craft on their decks across. I'm talking, the bigger landing ship LSTs carried smaller landing ship LSTs on some points, and LCTs of them. How much of the development of chemistry was driven by trying to make more reliable gunpowder among alchemists? That, to me, is the question. We might end up with a very different science. Could do. That's good. On the Eastern Front, Aaron's logistics was horrible. Most roads were dirt truck. Turned to mud in the fall. So, also, Russia used a wider railway gauge than anyone else on their few tracks. Did the UK ever have a revolt of the admirals moment? They've had a few issues over the years, but never quite a revolt of the admirals. They usually manage to manage things before that happens. Dan Freeman, we use glycyrrhizin trinitrate, occasionally dintrinate these days for the most part, as a heart medicine. Relatedly, Viagra is a similar sort of medicine. Seriously? Dan Freeman, you blocked All Hail the Blackburn Black Man? I'm surprised at the High Priest blocking this. Anuk, by the end of February 1942, the Abwehr fleet had been sunk or reneutralized. Was there a commander other than the Reuter that could have done better against the IJN? The thing is, for anyone else to be in command, there would have had to be more forces out there and senior horses. The thing is, you want to give Abda a real chance, then it's somehow got to have probably a Royal Navy carrier, because they have more of them than anyone else pretty much at that time on the Allies in service. I'm sorry, everyone who's now going, but America, no. In 1941, beginning of 1942, the Royal Navy has more carriers in service, and even they're overstretched. The US probably has more under construction at that point, but the Royal Navy has more actually in service. So you probably need a carrier and HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse to form the core of it. And if you're building Abda around, i.e. a reformed Force Z with Admiral Tom Phillips, it might well have had a chance. But really, the whole reason the Far East is such a trouble is because there's no sensible command structure to coordinate and command and control, coordinate everything. And it takes ages to get something set up. This is why I repeatedly say that where have I? Yeah. Let's say Lord Keyes should have, when he's no longer in charge of combined operations, a perfect way to both promote him and give him usefulness would have been to send him out there and go, we're combining all naval, land forces, etc., under the command of Keyes. For starters, it's going to sound strange, but the deterrence is as much about image as it is about the reality of what you're deploying. So if you are deploying an admiral of the fleet, you were deploying a very senior, very experienced person, someone who is considered Churchill's right-hand man, who is this very senior officer, world famous. It's going to change things. It's going to make things look like Britain's very serious about its Far East. So yeah, we're sending him some more ships as well. And then he'd have under him a land forces commander, air forces commander, and a sea forces commander, and combine all the Commonwealth fleets, everyone together under one. So all the Free Nations ships out there, everything would be combined under that command in 1941. And you give him the Indian Ocean, and basically you go, right, you have the Indian Ocean, you have everything from West Africa, from East Africa, to South America. That is your area. You're in charge of that, because we can't send any more supplies unless there is actually a war, but we can send you to organize it. And I think that would be very interesting. It would have also given a major problem for various other operations, because let's put it this way, when Britain and America ally, and you've suddenly got this admiral in charge of this thing, this 5-star admiral of the fleet, might well cause Roosevelt to go, you know what? I'm going to deal with MacArthur by making him less of a problem. MacArthur, you're now the land forces commander under the supreme commander, Allied forces, Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, Lord Keyes. Because Roosevelt, if he had the chance to do that, he would have done it just to watch MacArthur's head explode. Okay. Frank's Mother, if Japan had won Guadalcanal later in the campaign, what would they have been able to do afterwards? Not much, really. They won Guadalcanal. That's great. What are you going to do with it? What does it get you? It's you Guadalcanal for a while. That's nice. Does it buy you much time? No. Does it stop the massive American build-up? No. Does it maybe give you 2 to 3 months more war? Probably. Descott, 1868 commentation. Would that be in regards to the incident where the Royal Navy boarded a mail ship to arrest Confederate diplomats? That would be an incident where the US Navy boarded a British mail ship to arrest Confederate diplomats, and I think the US might have paid some compensation to Britain at that point. Again, it was a officer over-exceeding his commands and almost led to war. Because the British considered an insult on the British flag. Hello, King George V. Hello, KGB. Alfie Rowe, if the Royal Navy isn't worried about the US Navy in the 1860s, what point did they begin to worry about them? I suppose there might have been some people worried about the US Navy in the 1920s, but honestly, that was about it. They were worried about them from a technology point of view in the 1900s when the Italians were pushing forward the dreadnought race. But that was more because The fear was the Americans would produce a dreadnought so much more powerful than the British, or the Italians would produce a battleship so much more powerful than the British. The British would look second rate. And the British, remember, had to be the biggest and the best, which is what the dreadnought race was all about. So they were having to have a numbers race with Germany at the same time as having a technological competition with these other nations. Next one up, naval warfare with aircraft but no explosives. Painful, but probably starts to involve radio controlled and a lot of fuel. Wayne Boren, replace Carol Dorman with Philip Vian. Be an interesting change. It would be an interesting change. At that point, it would actually, the thing is, he was a senior enough captain. He could have, if he was out there being put in charge, but he'd have had to move a tribal flotilla out there. So you'd have also had a tribal flotilla. And then that could have been really interesting because the tribal flotillas are pretty much the RN's. Most of the RN forces trained to fight at night. In fact, the whole Navy and the aircraft are trained to fight at night. It's one of the things the Royal Navy's really pushed for. But whereas, like the Fleet Air Arm has been really pushed into it, the tribal force has really done a lot of work on night fighting because part of their job at night is to use their guns to illuminate by fire. That's the actual phrase the Royal Navy uses. So basically, you plaster a cruiser or a battleship with 4.7-inch shells. They're not going to penetrate or do much damage other than anything that's exposed. But the thing is, the explosions will light up the ship very nicely, which allows you to fire torpedoes at it. So the whole point is basically the tribal's job was to illuminate by fire. But Guy 629, without nukes, could the Allies have blockaded and bombed Japan in submission, or was a land invasion required to do time? A land invasion was pretty much inevitable because blockade and bombing wouldn't have lasted. It would have been going on too long, and they wouldn't have wanted to keep it going. Dr. C, you are given a blank check for UK defence budget. What would you do with your nuclear deterrence? Leave it at that. I would probably build another 4 vessels of the same class as the SSBNs, though, and have them fitted out as SSGNs with VLS in the VLS inserts into the tubes. And then I'd have an 8 sub-strategic force. But that strategic force would include the conventionally armed SSGNs and the SSBNs. So the SSG, I think that would add a greater pool of vessels if necessary, but also a greater pool of crews, and it would be a very useful force enabler for Britain to have, because it would be something Britain would have which other allies couldn't provide America and NATO, so it would give us a bit more of a, like the aircraft carriers do, it would give us a bit more of a punching above our weight capability. Although I hate that phrase. Can a floating dry dock count as a heavy lift ship? To an extent. That's why I said it's sort of... Shumi, random question. Could you make an Aegis sail CB? And how could you get around the propulsion thick of space that you need for a flight deck? I may have a kit bash in mind. Well, you would want the... You probably wouldn't be talking about an angled flight deck for starters. You want a straight land off and the land take off. And if you did it that way, you would be able to have your sails, if you think about them, you could cant off sail masts on either side at 45 degrees. And you could have sort of 3 of those on each side with canvas stripped up. So you'd have 3 sort of 45-degree angled sails like that off the ship on each side. Shumi, random question. Could you answer that one? How useful would Greek fire have been to a Napoleonic era navy? I'm sure, Vice Admiral Nelson, that someone could have found a use for it. So where are you? Travelling. Thanks, Barlow. Hail Nimrod. Jeremy Thatcher. Sorry, my mistake. It was the Alabama claims in 1872. There's all sorts of issues going on then. That's good. the UK had so many more. The USN was building up 2 perennial in comparison. The Royal Navy's 4 or 5 perennial, which were bigger and faster. Yes, but the USN tended to put more guns on. So the thing was, the British watched the American ones for the amount of guns they were carrying, and because the Americans were jumping to 16-inch. This is one of the reasons why I think HMS Agincourt was going to be 18-inch. It's have 18-inch guns. People go, oh, what's the need for it versus Germany? And they'd only have to go to 16-inch to match the Americans and the Japanese. But look at it. The Americans and Japanese start building 14-inch in response to the 13.5-inch. The British jump to 15-inch. In what way are they going to then go, you know what, we should jump to 16-inch? 16.5-inch is not enough over 16-inch. It sounds like, yes, we've got half an inch. It sounds petty. So the only real option is 18-inch for them to jump to. So this is my thinking about HMS Agincourt. I think she was going to be armed with 6 18-inch guns. Literally, because the Americans and Japanese are pushing for the 16-inch. And the British do like to jump ahead. But had read that the last US force coming charge was in 1942 in the Philippines. When was the last one for the Commonwealth? I think there might have been a couple in India in the 1920s, but I know there was some in World War One, right at the end of World War One. For sure, the smallest advancement in slowly evolving tech that if sent back 10 years would totally rewrite history. No to radar or aircraft. Engine density. If you sent back engines from 1920 to 1910, you would rewrite history. Because the engines, the small tube boilers and things by 1920 were from 1920 would have made the ships in 1910 far, far faster. We'd be looking at the super drone. There's no doubt at that point that Queen Elizabeth would have been built with small tube boilers and built even faster. And that would have a massive impact on World War One and have a massive impact on World War Two, because everything the speeds would go up. If in that, it usually comes down to engines. Engine density. Thank you, Richard Orton. I thought I was keeping pace with the chat, then I did the Flint land and realised the chat's not moving as fast as me. Alright. I was listening to an American historian going about US Navy World War II damage control, going on how nobody else came close to them in damage control. Just how true is this? Well, to be fair, the Brits, the Italians, the Germans, and the Japanese and the Americans all have fairly decent damage control. They also all have some fairly glaring examples of when damage control goes wrong. I wouldn't say any one of them was particularly better at it than the others. I'd say they all tried. I'd say if you are going to pick anyone, you probably pick Britain and America as being better. But that's largely because they had far larger navies and actually an opportunity to do damage control. You can't do much damage control in a submarine. If you get a hole in a submarine, there isn't going to be much chance for you to do anything. And that for the Germans explains most of their ships lost. So they can't do that. Yeah, sorry, no. There it is, the fact the Americans often have to do more damage control on their aircraft carriers than the British, because the American aircraft carriers tend to be slightly, of course, the British carriers built the armored flight deck, so that means they either don't get damaged or they get damaged very badly, which means you get a sort of different reputation than the American ones, which can be damaged, got back, quickly repaired, and come back, and you go, yeah, that's great damage control, and you go, well, yes, but it got damaged in the first place. Whereas from the same hit, the British one probably wouldn't have got damaged. Rig it's an interesting thing. Sometimes there are these questions. I'm just going to add in some time points for people. There we go. Right. Bam. Uh-huh. Realistically, British doctrine was for cavalry to be more in mounted infantry and scouts than a force for charging around with sabres and lances during the Boer War. To an extent, yes. Garrett Thatcher, any good books on British Royal Navy and Marine Ops in the Korean War? Not really. Good ones on the Korean War. There are some good ones which focus in on specific ships. There is a good one on the carriers in the Korean War by, I think, David Ragg, but I'm not 100% sure. Can MacArthur be like, but me want to be in charge? Well, the thing is, actually, the interesting thing would be MacArthur and Lord Keyes both would have probably sat down there and gone, which one of us got more decorations? We're both equally decorated. It could have actually been a match. This is one of the strange things. It would start off with probably some issues, but then the two actually would probably have got on quite well, because it would have been a case of Keyes would go, you fight a land war, that's fine. I'm looking after the aircraft and the ships. You go organize your land battles and get your glory that way. And I'll deal with the politics for you as well when you're dealing with the local governments. So all you have to do is deal with the politics in the US, which MacArthur would have loved, and would have meant Keyes could have ignored him whenever he wanted to. Alright, Bud Guy 229. Lieutenant Ramsey led the last cavalry charge in 1942. He didn't surrender and became a guerrilla leader. Interesting. Rex Spartan, if the USN had lost Midway, what would happen to Nimitz or Guadalcanal too? If the USN lost at Midway, Nimitz would probably have survived, because you lose things in war. You occasionally lose battles, and it would more likely be, in the nicest way, blamed on the admirals at the spot rather than him. He gave them all the pieces to win, and then they didn't manage to win. Guadalcanal would have probably been lost, and the USN would have had to spend another few months building. Making Admiral King and General MacArthur close allies against that command arrangement would not bode well for either the UK Admiral of the Fleet or FDR. Again, there is one thing, Trent. There are exactly 4 admirals in the Royal Navy who Admiral King actually liked. That was one of them. So, and also you have to remember, King really, really disliked MacArthur. So it would have been one of the few British admirals he liked, and annoying MacArthur. Oh, and it would mean that as far as King was concerned, there was Nimitz in charge of the Pacific and the main campaign there, and the Southeast Asia was a British commander, so therefore he could say, well, hang on, that's primarily a British theatre and Commonwealth theatre, so we don't need to send as many supplies that way. Second, were there ever any plans for catamaran dreadnoughts or aircraft carriers? I'm sure someone has looked at them occasionally, but no one's ever actually built them. The Shrike 16, 616. SNGNs are basically submarine arsenal ships. To an extent. Constance, any idea why MacArthur gave up post-war responsibility for the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, and so on to SEAC, a Southeast Asian command, as opposed to sticking with the original plan of having US forces occupy the region? Politics. And also, he wasn't going to get the troops for it. Frank Spooner, how hard is it to maintain a multinational alliance? Was it harder work with the USA? It's always hard to maintain a multinational alliance. And it's harder when you have multiple powers in together. They're all quite big. Wayne Boring, poking around Amazon, just found a book that claims that the British nevertheless had 70 battleships, larger and more powerful than ever before, under construction at the outbreak of war. World War II. 70? 70? In Chatfield's dreams, maybe. SMS Kaiser, how did the RN react to the construction of the Type 21 Electroboot? They had a loss of destroyers and frigates on the construction, plus the Castle-class corvettes. That's annoying. That's annoying. Less went down than I thought would go down, but yeah, that's annoying. Basically, they just kept everything being built as fast as they could. Because the thing is, yes, those would have been far better submarines, and they would have had more likelihood of getting to the hunting area. But if they have to get to the hunting area, they then still have to find the convoy, get to the convoy, find the convoys, and then at that point they have to fight their way through the convoy's escort. Senator, what do you think about the ideas to provide modern cargo ships with retractable sails? If it helps, great. Hello, Stephenson. How you doing? Had to get Mum's front brakes redone before she headed off to the friend's celebration of life. I hope she has a nice party. Freeman, could you see Agincourt being triple 15-inch and extra engines for speed and resistance with the heavier guns? Well, that's okay. That's usually Drax's idea. Is actually the idea that she'd be triple 15 inches, and the thing is, that is the other option. But, and I say this with everything and Paris, the reason is she stopped production. They stopped her construction. So that's what makes her more interesting. She's a one-off Queen Elizabeth ordered, and we know she's special. So she's either going to have double 18s, or she could, of course, have triple 15s. But if she has triple 15s, why isn't she built? Because triple 15s is not that much of a problem for you to absorb in the existing system when you're worrying about war. 18-inch guns is. You can understand. And that's going to take longer than triple 15s because whilst, yes, you have to build a turret, it's easier to get along with. Also, there's the fact that if you were building triple 15s that earlier, why didn't you build a triple turret gun until you got to the Nelsons? Because you'd think if you were designing triple turrets earlier, you'd have at least be putting them in the hood. You would have possibly put them in. Well, you went with one under production for Renown and Repulse, but for Hood, you build new turrets. So they could have put treble turrets for her if they'd been designing them. And then, you could, as Hood was built on a completely blank slate, you can imagine Hood, she would have had 12 15-inch guns. That would have been a really interesting Hood. But no, so I think it is a double-gun design. But, I said, it's a question. Jaron Thatcher, if Scotland goes independent, where do we put Trident? The options are Wales or Cornwall. Or the Falklands, really. Falklands is a long way away, but you could secure it, but it would be a massive population boost for them to support it down there. Wales would be the closest, but of course then you have to deal with the Welsh Assembly. And Cornwall, that's rather front-loading the Royal Navy all down in one space. It's viable. It's going to be expensive and not going to be quick to move, though. It's going to be incredibly expensive if you have to move it. So the hope is Scotland doesn't go independent. Next one. Do you know any naval enthusiasts that had discussions like these in the early half of the last century? Lots. Trent Lang, any idea why MacArthur gave up post-war responsibility for Dutch East India Nation? Because the FDR and later Truman administrations told him to do so. And also because he wasn't going to get the political support to have them. Sure. You take the Antanza tank, a boat idea, back to World War II. Still limited by World War II capabilities, what turret do you put with what boat? Who produced it, i.e. pre-USA involvement? If anyone's going to build a tank boat, it's probably the Japanese. And probably their one-man tank gun. That would probably be the sensible turret to put on it. Probably would be the Japanese, because they're the ones who are fitting about island campaigns. Dan, you're right. What if Admiral Beatty had gone in command of 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron instead of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron? Would he have opened fire on the Goeben before the British ultimatum expired? Would he have commanded at Darnells? The options are possibly, because he was a glory hunter, so he might have done that, or he might have set a different ultimatum. And would he have commanded the Darnells? He would have been the person on the spot, so quite possibly. It depends. If he's successful against Goeben, then he probably gets promoted to 1st Battlecruiser Squadron because he's the successful commander, or the Battlecruiser Force. If he's not successful at catching Goeben, then he probably doesn't, in which case he's there for the Darnells. That's good. Sending tech back 10 years. Nuclear propulsion designs. USS Nautilus in 1944. Having the increased endurance of speed in 44 makes the IJN an artificial reef and much sooner. Yeah. That would be fun. Matthew Malecki, if the First London Treaty would have allowed all member states to build 2 replacement battleships, what would that have looked like? That would have looked very, very scary. Especially for the British. Because the reason the British were able to get away building 2 was because their battle fleet was so old compared to the Germans and to the Japanese and Americans who were still building theirs. So basically, the Americans and Japanese would have probably just built 2 of the ships they were building and decided whichever ones of them fitted their needs best. The Brits would have. Well, that becomes a real debate, because if everyone else is finishing off, they're going to look at what other people are finishing and then build to adapt. So if the Japanese and America, let's say the Americans decide to build some Lexington battlecruisers, then the British might well go, right, and we need the battlecruisers, a version of the Nelsons. If they are all building heavy battleships, then the British will probably build a Nelson or Rodney. It depends. If everyone's allowed to finish off 2 ships, then the British might actually get 2 G3s. The French probably don't build anything. The Italians probably finish off their 15-inch ships. They're ones which were the equivalents of the Queen Elizabeths, which look gorgeous, and I have a mild love of that. Is disturbing. Because honestly, the Italian battleships were just gorgeous. For anyone who doesn't know the class I'm talking about, I'm going to grab their picture quickly, if it still works. The Francesco Caricola class. Let's see if I can get this to work. This is the Francisco Caracola class. And they are rather gorgeous. Now, give me a second and I will tell you all about them. The reason I say the Italians would have finished these off is because they cancelled them they're scrapped in 1926 and 1921, but they were going to have 8 15-inch guns, about 11 inches of armor, displace of roughly 35,000 tons, 4 shafts, 4 steam turbines, 105,000 shaft horsepower, 28 knot speed. They would have been absolutely gorgeous ships, and if they could have built 2, they did consider building, completing Francisco Carola as equivalent to as an aircraft carrier in 1919, but they decided it was too expensive. But that's the interesting thing: the Italians, could have built this wonderful class, this absolutely lovely class, and it would have been, well, it would have been gorgeous. They're lovely looking ships. They really are. Dan Freeman, mathematically, all you need is for the London Naval Conference in 1930 to be more of a failure and nothing changes from Washington, so everyone can build new from around 1930 anyway. That would have been interesting if Britain had started building new from 1930. Hey, right, so Frank Swanner, thank you for that. A super chat that also doesn't allow me to do a time check. So I'm only running 14 minutes behind everyone. What is your history of Canada tour? Who you would like to visit? This chat was loaded at 1 hour 4 minutes. Well, I'd like to visit Quebec. I'd like to visit Hyder and Sackville, and basically, I'd like to tour your navy, the navy bases of Canada, because there's a few archives, there's a few bases which I would like to go see. I'd like to go see some of my friends in the Canadian Navy. I've got a lot of friends in the RCN, and they are lovely people. And frankly, I want to go take them up on their officer tour in their ships. Also, there's a couple of unis out there which have asked me if I go, if I happen to be nearby, would I perhaps mind turning up and giving a guest lecture? And I wouldn't mind doing that because they're quite cool unis. If they ever developed to reach 21-inch guns, would they just load torpedoes? If they did reach 21-inch guns, having a torpedo shell would have probably been a viable thing. It could have been quite scary. Bud Guy 8829, do you see the USN ever building a carrier with a crew size close to the UK crew size, or is the focus on having enough crew for damage control, keeping them large crew sizes? Well, the USN have 2 reasons for having such large crews. One, they have nuclear reactors, which require a very intensive watch system. 2, they talk about damage control a lot, but really the difference is whether you consider the automated systems the European navies use on their ships as that bad versus having people there. Now, people are, of course, the 100% solutions, but the damage control systems are pretty darn useful, and you have enough crew to use them. So the difference is not that the Americans, the British, and the Europeans and other nations don't care about damage control. It's just the Americans tend to go for a human-intensive damage control, and the other nations tend to, because they have smaller budgets, go for a hybrid of systems and people. And in the nicest way, sometimes the automated systems are pretty darn useful. Richard Author, Patton in the Pacific Theatre in South Africa and Europe. I'm fairly sure at some point he thumps MacArthur. Right, Dirt Squad, sending nuclear propulsion back 10 years. Would the USN have experimented with nuclear-powered Essex class or making Midway class in the first CVN? Probably the latter. If anything was going to get that over with the Midway class. Operator, if the RN wanted a swordfish too, what would the specs be? What do they want it to do? Are they looking for a strike aircraft? If they're looking for a strike aircraft, then the specs would probably be something which could carry a decent load and high speed and fairly stealthy, optionally crude. Anuk, sounds like King gets the win-win-win sticking it to MacArthur. Yes, as I said, the number of British admirals that King actually likes, you can number on one hand, less than on hand. The number of US admirals he actually likes, you can just about get into two hands. King is he's America first. That's fine, but he's America first when America first means something different. Ralph Raceback, the F-35 bothers me in a naval role because they are single-engined. Should they have gone double-engined? The Harrier was single-engined. I would prefer a double-engined aircraft, yes, but the Harrier was single-engined. You can make it work. And the F-35's engine is a lot more reliable and a lot better than the Harrier's was. Although, don't tell that to any Harrier pilot because they tend to be very loyal to their aircraft and love them and go, no, ours was better. Wayburn. I think whoever wrote that book description had a weird definition of battleship. He probably included all the cruisers and destroyers. All the cruisers, carriers, and battleships possibly would add up to 70. If he's including all the destroyers and all the sloops and all the other things ordered as well, then in the nicest way, he'll be in the hundreds. But as the Shrike 616 says, if they had changed the naval variant, well, let's be honest, the double variant of the F-35B is one of the naval variants. So you would, if you had the Stovall bid twin engine, that would have made it very, very heavy for a vertical takeoff. And if you had twin engine for the carrier, that's fine, but made it very different from the land-based version. Just remember, it was supposed to replace the F-16, which is a single-engined aircraft, and to an extent, the F-18 season Ds. There is a Montello tower near Quebec built in 1800s. How did the battle planes at Abraham go down? I've read a little, but this is insane. Good recognition. Was this General Wolfe's song? Oh, there are many songs which are General Wolfe songs. I think I know one that you're probably meaning, but no, I'm not mentioning it because I'm not being asked to sing it. And the Battle of Plains Abraham basically are the Royal Navy gets the army past the blocking point because they can't get past the other way. They get up the cliffs behind Quebec and form up, and then it turns into an absolute pellew of a battle. And I do use the name pellew of the battle rather than melee. It's vicious and successful for the British, but Wolfe dies. It's just there's so many senior officers die fighting that battle. It's a junior officer's dream. They get promoted so rapidly, it's amazing. Twarog. Dirt Squad. Why would they do it either? They barely had enough materials for 3 bombs, including a test. And really, the nuke CVs wouldn't add much capability there. They'd probably done it just because they could. Remember, this is the U.S. Navy at the end of World War II. They're doing a lot of things just because they can. America as a whole is doing a lot of things just because they can. Frank Spanner, Dr. C, where can I tell people to check out the timeline charts I posted? They should be posted on the Discord because there's a timeline section which I've set up on the Discord. It's not called. It's not a server. It's a section in the chat, section of the server, a chat a room for it, which is literally for the timeline charts. So just share the links to that. Dirt Squad, to Carl Tong. The question was about selling tech back 10 years. Also, it's much easier to enrich uranium for reactors than bombs. Reactors need about 40% U-235. Bombs need above 95%. Roughly. Decline on 95. How? What do you do about rogue nations like Iran that keep boarding and interning ships? We seem to be an impasse with them. You just need to increase presence in the area. The only thing you can do is be there when they do something. You can't react to them. You have to be there when they do it. You can't go chasing them down or hunting them because that won't work. So you have to you have to be the presence there. You have to be able to tell them no in person. You have to be there first. So this is why I think the Royal Navy is probably going to end up with an OPV deployed out there to back up the Type 23. It's there. It's probably going to end up with eventually replacing that Type 23 with a Type 31 on station and probably still have an OPV. This is why you need OPVs, because Iran doesn't really want to war. They don't want to fight. But if you're not actually there in their face, they are going to ignore you. And if you are watching them with a UAV, they'll shoot it down because they're fairly sure no one's going to start a war over a UAV. So you need a crewed system. And in nicest way, a crewed helicopter might do, might not. There's a case of problem. But a crewed helicopter supporting a crewed ship, yeah, that'll work. Even if that ship's an OPV, it's got enough firepower. Well, if we can give them a bit of a firepower bomb, they would have. Well, Stafford. At least you're being at least you're being helpful, even if you're not chaperoning her. Usually, I manage to send the chaperoning to my sister. She's better at those sort of things. Franksman, are there any museums that you'd warn people not to visit? Not online, visibly in YouTube. There are a few I like the heck of. There are a couple I get banned from every so often because I go in and tell them what they got wrong. There are a couple of which now, whenever I turn up, send someone. This sounds so egotistical, big-headed. There are a couple which, when I turn up, send someone to follow me around and check what I'm correcting so they can write it up. The museums are lovely places, and I love them dearly. There are very few museums which are purposely bad, so I wouldn't slam them. Even those ones which I think might be purposely bad, the reason they're purposely bad is because of what they're seeking to do. And frankly, I don't call them museums at that point. If you are seeking to misrepresent history in order to make money and pander to a certain form of politics, you are not a museum. You are a history-themed amusement park. That's it. Good evening, Jalen. Can't wrong. Agreed. I simply disagree with the idea of USA with early CVNs. SNs, that's different. I doubt they'd be quiet in any way and would have a short life, but still an advantage. I actually think you're more likely to get the early CVNs than the SSNs, because for the SSNs you'd have to build a far bigger pressure hull. And it's quite significant, and it's a significantly different shape hull from the hydrodynamics perspective than you would build for a diesel submarine. But, or an SSK of the late World War II type. However, they would probably be working on that and quite happily, but I think you would have the midways. Now, please don't take this as gospel, but the reason I think you probably would see nuclear-powered midways appear, and this is part of it, is because America, by the end of World War II, isn't just looking at fighting World War II. They are consciously starting to build and prepare for what they see as the New World Order coming, and forging that and leading that. You know, after World War One, they've seen themselves as parity with Britain, but they haven't built up to it. They now are of the belief that if they don't take leadership, the world is going to get increasingly more problematic. So they want their form of a leadership to continue. So nuclear-powered carriers, in the nicest way, would have been a step ahead. However, this is where it gets interesting. If you have the Americans build a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, i.e. the Midways, the odds are the British turn the Maltas into nuclear-powered carriers, because you could do that more easily than you could do the Audacious class, in which case the British probably do still build the Maltas. So you could have a very interesting what-ifs going on there, because you'd have the British wanting nuclear-powered carriers because the Americans have them before. Anyone says, no, they don't have the money. The British developed the entire V-Force, which is 3 different types of heavy bomber, and nuclear bombs. Also, they can call their status still their status. So if you don't think if America had a nuclear carrier at the end of World War II, the British wouldn't be building a nuclear carrier, you are sorely underestimating the value of pride to the British leadership at the time. Jennifer. Interesting fact. Jennifer, which class are we talking about? Drax spoke about that class this morning. His criticism of them was the gaps between the superfiring mounts. You see, and I will get that back up so I can talk about this. Now, Drax has a good point about the differences between the superfiring mounts. However, the Italians had a reason for it. All these guns could do, all of the forward and stern guns could do both full 360s, as I understand it. Now, if I had been them, I would have moved B and X out so they could also do 360s, and you would get the widest field of fire. However, they tried to keep them closer together because then they thought they could have a more condensed armor in a slightly all-or-nothing belt configuration, and would therefore be able to use that weight for other things. Not that they're treaty limited, but rather weight to power ratio, power to weight ratio, and speed perspectives. I think they're good ships. I have to say the other thing I'd be tempted to do if I was going back in time, 10 years from 1920 to 1910, is introduce them to using turrets, and I would take the E-class 6-inch turrets back in time with me and go, yes, your secondary armament. Do not put it in these freaking casemates. Put in these little turrets. But yeah, that's one of the few areas where I'm sort of more keen on the Francisco Cavalloclas than Drakkes, but they are beautiful ships. And I think they would have been, I think a couple of them on the Italian battle line would have been a major issue for the Royal Navy in World War II. Graham Howland, how did BT actually get the commands? For example, study was proven as such. Seniority and the fact that he's incredibly good at self-promotion, self-publication and promotion to the press and the public. Don't forget, those Francisco character designs have too much space between A, B, and then X and Y turrets. Too much citadel. As I said, it allows A and Y to do a full 360, and therefore allows them better fire forward or back. In case of the structure. So there are reasons for it. I'm not sure I follow the reasons, but I like the design still. Okay. Seneca, what are the top 10 naval tactical blunders in your opinion? No BT, stolen from Drax Live. Top 10 tactical blunders. Well, I was there for Drax Live, so you're stealing this. Tactical blunders. My biggest, most annoying blunder in the entire history of anything is probably HMS Glorious and HMS Courageous to an extent. I would say though both those ships were wasted. The fact that they one tactical blunder, one was allowed to go off, wandering on its own, with just a pair of destroyers to get home when there were enemy surface ships known to be in the area and enemy submarines known to be in the area. It just doesn't seem sensible to me, and I don't know. Frankly, Lord Corkenori was a twat in allowing that one, excuse the French. As for Courageous, well, using her to hunt submarines is part of the Iron's doctrine, but honestly, you shouldn't be using a full fleet carrier for that job. And it would have saved so much trouble later on having extra fleet carriers around. They would have been useful, even small ones. Like Courageous and Glorious, they would have been useful. Other ones. I would say not launching the third and fourth waves at Pearl Harbor. You might have lost more aircraft to the enemy to the American air defenses, but you would have done significantly more damage because the Americans' air defenses were significantly depleted by that point. They didn't have that much ammunition left. They didn't have that much anything left, and you could have done a lot more damage, and that could have given you a lot more strategic time. If we're going back in time, you've got many things in the Napoleonic Wars. I know Drac himself has already. I'm trying not to consciously not mention the ones Drac mentioned because it would seem rude to just copy that one. But the one I would have to agree with on massively is what happened when. Well, let's put it this way: the Franco-Spanish fleet should not have been at sea to fight Nelson. Villeneuve was going to be replaced. His replacement's on the way. He goes out to sea. He sees Nelson. He decides he's going to try and withdraw. That's just no. It's not what you do. And then, of course, HMS Africa comes along, going, "Hello!" And the French think there's a third column coming somehow. I'd say several of the British frigates fighting American frigates in the War of 1812 commit some severe tactical blunders. Crete is one massive tactical blunder in terms of defense and security. Same with Singapore and Malaya. Crete shouldn't have fallen, so neither should Malaya. Norway. But there's a sort of a strategic blunder in terms of the government. But there's also tactical blunders. If you think about it, one fort decides to fire and Blucher gets sunk. Imagine if every fort, which had some manning, some people manning it, crewing it, and serving it had decided to fire. So that's a lot of tactical blunders in my mind. The Germans could have lost a lot that way. I think. Then I've done that one. And I would say Camperdown. If the Dutch had sailed 3 or 4 weeks earlier, they would have not found a fleet out there because of the mutinies. But by the time they sail, Duncan has a fleet together. They've given him time to organize, get his fleet together, and that's a big thing. And then the Armada. Well, can we call it tactical, or do we call it strategic? Whatever you call it. The idea of having so little communication with the Duke of Parma that you're trying to coordinate all these things and the communication is going backwards and forwards, and you have to end up anchoring basically opposite in the English fleet in a very open bay, so perfect for fire ships to attack because the wind's coming towards you. No, that's bad tactical decisions. Really, what should have happened is Parma should have been ordered to secure a suitable bay for the fleet to come and meet him at. So it would be there, and then the fleet could have kept sailing until they found that bay. Dr. C, what UK aircraft have you been able to sit in? I've done Sea Harriers and Harriers. I've not done Swordfish, but I have done Fulmar. I've done Hellcat, Wildcat, and Corsair. Fleet Air on ones, of course. Done Tiger Moth. And you name a helicopter or transport aircraft, and I've probably been in it. Sometimes I've done something even more insane than just being in them. John Shea. For HMS Agincourt, as either battleship or battlecruiser, what other ship class would be the closest to Agincourt's possible length, possible armor belt, and possible armaments? Well, for that one, basically take the Renown and Repulse conversion of the R class and add it on to a Queen and do that same sort of ratio to Queen Elizabeth design, and you don't have something that far off Hood. So that's your sort of thing, and then if you go with the same idea that they end up with go for Renown and Repulse, which is 6 guns. Well, they go for a 6-gun in free twin turret design, which suggests the British already had an idea for a 6-gun free twin turret design already out there, which I'm thinking was Agincourt, and she was going to be on the way to 18-inch guns. Both main and secondary batteries. Secondary batteries is another interesting thing, because again, I think it would have been a la Hood style. With all the battlecruiser losses in both World Wars, do you think the battlecruiser idea was worth it, or do you think it would have been better to wait for the fast battleship? Like Guy 8829, what makes you think the fast battleship is a creation of the battleship, not of the battlecruiser? Because let's be honest, the fast battleship is basically going, right then, we need something fast in the battleship, but we need to have more armor than a battlecruiser. So if you have the battlecruiser is what leads to the fast battleship, not the other way around. They're aiming for battlecruiser level speeds. And let's be honest, the Iowas would have been called probably battlecruisers. Montanas have been built because they would. That's what would have they had more armor than other ships did at the time, but they had a lot less armor than Montanas. So if you're building the Montanas as well, then the Iowas, they're battle cruisers. Trent, the logics and politics of the Southwest Pacific are understudied, and what is there is full of institutional personality serving historiography. Hi, decision. Hi, everyone. Sorry, nice shirt, Dr. Ross. Thank you. So, Johnson, why I'm a fan of the Return of Sloop and Revenge of the Cruiser. Hope you enjoyed the Boofer class if you haven't had a chance. I have had a chance, and it looks rather cool. Don't get cock off the Ark. Worst museum ship, the Ark. I am not getting into that one. Duncan, so Doctor, when you go to some museums, you do a passable Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang. Your impression? When I go to some museums, it's rare I'm not met by the curator in person to go, hello. There's at least 3 museums I am not supposed to enter without giving them a heads up about a day in advance. Oh, that's one very famous museum in central London. I walked into their feature exhibit about a not so distant conflict as World War II. In fact, a definitely not so distant conflict as World War II, and corrected every single display they had. I was 22, 23 at the time, very cocky. I'm slightly more mellow now, I'm older. Batman. Hi, Alex. For fun, let's assume you were suddenly put in charge of a Scandinavian navy and had to build and equip it. Where would you focus, and what tasks would you prioritize over others? If I'm doing it today, or am I doing it in the past? If I was doing it today, and I was in charge of a Scandinavian navy, let's say the Norwegian one, I would probably be looking at modeling it to an extent on the Danish one, in that I have some larger frigates and something like the Abson class for global operations and expeditionary. So I have something I can offer allies if I want to, if I was operating out of areas. But domestically, I'd be wanting SSKs and something like the Visby class to protect me, and some decent attack aircraft. Team Looker. So nuclear powered HMS Unicorn was a possibility. Doubtful it'd be Unicorn. As said, it'd probably be the Malta class. Bad guy 229. How much do things change if the Korean War doesn't happen? If the Korean War doesn't happen, you probably don't. What the Korean War succeeds in succeeds in sort of doing is hastening things which are already in play. So basically, the transition from piston to jet aircraft and all sorts of operational costing, and needing the immediately available ships. So you might have had some of the bigger carriers actually would have had the money to modify them, upgrade them, but as I said, Victorious was incredibly expensive. You could have control of Parliament for one day. You can pass one new law. It cannot be altered. What would it be? You cannot reinstall the Two Powers Act. There are so many things I'd like to change. I think I'd go to full biggie and I'd write a whole new UK constitution. If I had the power to implement the control, I would write the constitution myself, and we'd have a codified constitution. And it would be. I have worked on these sort of ideas before of what I would do if I could codify the UK constitution. For starters, I'd have defence and education probably both linked at a minimum of 3% of GDP. Because I value both those areas, and I think you need both. I think you need them. I would, there's all sorts of things. If I was in charge, as I said, a whole new codified constitution with all sorts of things written into it. Basically, I would make an idiot, what I would call an idiot-proof constitution, in that it would have triple locks on various things like human rights and rights to privacy, and let's say the 3% on defence and education as minimums, etc., would be sort of, they would have things like you have to not only have a majority Supreme Court ruling, majority in every house of every chamber in the House of Parliament, which could well be a free chamber organisation under my new constitution. But and I would also probably would actually codify the roles of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, Northern Ireland Assembly, and the English Parliament, which would have to be set up, because I would basically standardise it and equalise everything between everyone, turn it into a federal codified constitutional system. Let's go, boom, done, passed, deal with it. So yeah, it wouldn't be so small as just fixing defence. Besides, that would take more than one act. No, new codified constitution written by me. Oh. 1:34. So I'm now 18 minutes behind. What would have been a world? It would have been like if the Dutch kept Manhattan Island. That's a rather interesting question, because if the Dutch keep Manhattan Island, the question is, does it become part of the United States of America, or does America end up having a war with the Netherlands over it? Came close then, but didn't get it. Luckily, there is more Iron Brew being picked up tomorrow. Luckily, thanks to, and I do have to say thanks to Drac on this one, who has been, as well as a very good friend and an amazing help constructing my office, has also been a mentor with all this YouTube stuff. And a really good mentor. I am starting to have enough financial independence thanks to YouTube, etc., thanks to all your kind generosity and support, and super chats and Patreon and subscribing to the channel, which I'm free off getting having to do another emoji, and the Spreadshirt, that I can start to afford to do research trips in the UK at least. It's going to be if things keep growing, then maybe next year. Especially if I manage to, let's put it this way, if by some miracle I do actually succeed in winning this bet with my aunt and do get to 13,000 subscribers by December 31st, judging by the way YouTube works in terms of money from ads and other things that come through, I could actually start to afford to save up that maybe by the middle of the year next year I could afford to do the Canada trip, even if I don't have a lot more TV work, etc. No, my basis is if I can get the TV work and enough teaching work, I can afford it. But, if I can get enough of them. Frank's right. What is ultimately the utility of having main guns on the rear and half of warships? It's redundancy. It is redundancy. It's also covering your rear quarters. So it means that if the enemy's behind you, appears from behind you, you can fire at them. If you are trying to withdraw, you can still fire at them and cover your retreat. That's also why Renown and Repulse have guns that have a turret back there. It covers. It's useful in a broadside, but more importantly, if they're chasing, which is what they're trying to do, that's why they have 4 guns forward. But if they're being chased, they have two guns off to keep you away. Carmen, any fleet carrier is better than none. Yes. Broadly speaking, any fleet carrier is better than none. Unless that fleet carrier is burn, then it's probably better to have none. Customers, I'd say going to war with would be the biggest regret. Catherine, hello. What do you think King would have think of modern Navy orientations? You Brits seem to be doing okay, but we Yanks are indecisive on transition. I think he'd be red with rage by now. I think Admiral King would have single-handedly reorganized the fleet by now. Possibly by actually strangling people with pure fury. Not even actually having to physically strangle them, just the intense look of fury. Also, I think, and I say this way from King's perspective, because I can imagine him being the sort. If I would see King being kind of like Arleigh Burke as well. I could see them getting the modern fleet in hand. Because really, that's the thing. The US Navy these days, I look around, and the US Army has Lieutenant General Ted Martin, who I so hope for the US Army's sake gets a 4-star, because he is a really, really cool figure. In that he's good at communicating to the public. Everyone I know in the US Army says, even if they don't like him, respect him. And he articulates and actually has an idea. The thing is, you need, for your senior people, you need someone who can articulate your ideas. There is often been a position that you appoint on your. There is a small problem in modern armed forces, in that it tends to be that we are left with a level, especially in the small nations, where you can appoint for three things. You have technical ability, i.e., ability to deal with the engineering and the science, which you need for procurement, because you need someone who understands that for your procurement. The ability to command and lead and make decisions in war and have good strategy. That's a good one. And politics, to actually deal with the politicians and the public. You need someone with these skills, these two, to be your leadership, as in your First Sea Lord, Commander in Chief, US Navy, that sort of thing. They don't need this. They need these two. But the trouble is, for most of the way up your command structure, what you need are these two abilities, which means this one gets ignored. And the Royal Navy recently has been quite lucky. From basically Phil Jones onwards, the First Sea Lords have been fairly good at this one, as well as good at these two. They've been very lucky. And I'm looking at the next likely successor, and I'm thinking, yeah, they've still got someone good. I'm looking at level below that, and I'm slightly worried. I almost want to take some of them off to one side and go, right then, let's all go have a nice meeting where I will try and explain this to you and try and help you get better. But that also sounds rather egotistical for someone like me to do that. But as that literally is my job, that is literally what a naval historian who does PhD in what studies exists to do. We exist to make sure there is a communication between the technical stuff and the public stuff. Because if you think what I spend my life doing and what my main source of income is going and reading archive materials, going and looking at the various sources, various primary information, and writing a book which is intelligible to the rest of the population who never goes anywhere near that, but is actually and also the people who are interested in that, who do go near it but are interested in it. So it has to be able to be read by as many people as possible. Otherwise, I don't get paid. So I'm literally a person who, by specialism, specializes in translating this to that. And it's the question of getting it to work. And it's their skills which are sort of sometimes shortish. Because also, especially on ships and navies, you spend your life going away around the world with people who understand what you're doing. It becomes completely alien to you that there are people outside who don't. Which is another reason why I encourage naval officers to be on Twitter. Because as whilst Twitter is a small, self-selecting part of this world and really doesn't really sort of does it's a small self-selecting part of the world, and it's really not necessarily politically representative, but at least it's part of the world you can understand. Seneca, I recently watched your live about carry design. You didn't want to show the Blackburn Blackman. Smash cut to a year later, so here is my Blackburn Blackman merch. In the end, you either have to give in, or you're going to be swept over by the tide. Blunders in naval history. Craddock engaging Coronel. Darnell's in general, and letting go and go. Darnell's was tactically terrible, but strategically sensible. Craddock engaging at Coronel, he had no choice. You see, tactically it's a bad idea, but tactically also he has no choice. He has no way of getting away. And this is one of the interesting things. If he'd had Canopus with him, that could have been a very different battle, because if they see a battleship, they will outrun the battleship, but they'll probably go, hang on, that's quite a big ship. Oh, good lord, that's a pre-dread. So that's the thing. Again, if Britain had more dreadnoughts in service, they might have had more pre-dreadnoughts available, in which case he might have had more than just Canopus with him. Letting the Goban go, yeah. Disfrontal. I heard Malaya and I'm summoned here full of rage. We all are. Too much. Frank, no one in real life would really worry about exposing broadsides the way they are on World of Warships. There are no guaranteed citadels if you show your broadside. Yeah, World of Warships is interesting game mechanics wise. You have to remember some of the stuff is for getting enjoyment of the game. Okay? So, I see World of Warships, and the reason I do Armchair Admirals and those things is a gateway to history. It's a way I can get more people interested in history. But it's a game, it's not history. In real life, the Soviet Union do not have amazing battleships which can do all that magic stuff. In real life, aircraft carriers never get that close if they can avoid it, unless they're British carriers, in which case they're sailing with an escort. In real life, when you have fleets involved, they actually start talking together, and there's usually one person in charge. And it's very much a fleet doctrine, not a free-for-all. So, it's a game mechanics. Enjoy the game, though. Enjoy the beauty of it. Enjoy the drawings in it. It's amazing for that level. Declan 95. Was Freiburg given a bad hand at Crete, and how much of the blame for Crete's fall does he deserve? He was given a bad hand. Honestly, he shouldn't be put in charge. The Royal Marine Major General, who was in charge of the Murnab, should have been left in charge. Basically, if you have an existing commander who has an existing plan for how to defend the island, do not then parachute in a load of army officers over his head and say you're now no longer in charge, and they don't know the island when they just turn up. It really doesn't work. For some reason, the command structure goes to pot because they don't know what they're doing, and the only one who does know what they're doing is now only in charge of a very small part of it. Plus, Crete should have had some railways built. Crete needed a railway. After World War I, someone should have built a railway around that island. Take care, Shrike 616. Hanuk, what do you think this next generation of USN destroyer design will be, given the Burks have so little growth potential? Probably a Zumwalt class. Well, if they're sensible, they'll go with the Zumwalt hull, and they'll just build a new superstructure and put in new systems in it. The Zumwalt hull and power supply will do fine. Take on the latest in terms of Burke SBY and missiles, and add in more missiles, and you could probably get a decent sort of ship. That'd certainly be the cheapest and quickest, so they probably won't do that. Mm-hmm. Simish, when the rest of the US cruisers get retired, will they bother making more or only bigger DDs? Well, let's be honest. At 14,000 tons, I'm not sure I'd call Zumwalt class destroyers. And if they're building if their next generation are again destroyers are 15,000 tons, they're not. If they're not called cruisers, that's only a name reason. That's only for naming reasons. It's working out what next generation of cruisers are going to look like if they build them. They do need something for that role. They need some first rates. And that's the thing. It depends on how they're going to get them. I remember meeting Draken at the museum where I worked in and got to walk around with him. A little luckily, he was very happy with displays. I'm sure you would love it. But again, no navy. I still enjoy navy museums with no navies. Wayne Byrne, if you ever visit HMCS Hyder, give me a heads up. I'm only 2 hours away. I will do. If I'm in Canada, let's put it this way. If I'm in Canada and I'm doing a visit around the things, and if I'm doing ship visits, I will basically announce where I'm going when I'm going for it. It's like if I'm planning on doing some time down in Portsmouth soon and doing some recordings down there because I've got permissions to go. I just haven't managed to arrange a date. So yeah, I'll announce these things before I go, so people, if they want to, can come along and help out and wander around with me. And I'll give a bit of a guided tour while I'm looking into history. Dan Freeman, I'm tempted to accompany you around a museum or two with a pile of post-it notes, stop date labels, and displays. Oh. It's better than what my museum did. You literally followed me around with blank sheets of paper to put over displays. Mm-hmm. Bad guy is saying, would the North Carolina and South Dakota also be considered battle cruisers like the Iowas when they all had similar armor if the Montanas were built? Not really, because basically they would have been the previous generation of battleships. The point is, the Iowa was really the battle cruisers for Montana's battleship when they're the same generation. So that's the thing. You don't compare. Usually, when you look at a battle cruiser, it has the previous generation's level of battleship armor. If you look at battle cruisers when they're built, they usually have armor not too dissimilar to that of the previous generation of battleships. Constant idiot proof, is that possible? Trust me, if you can build enough locks in there, then it makes it very, very difficult. Juicy Fusion. Real drone carrier idea that has been brought up on build farms. Should it resemble a normal carrier or use smaller, more numerous forms that don't require a full flight deck? The thing is, if you, it's how long a range do you want those aircraft to have? Because the moment you want to have long range and multi-role capability, they get very big very quickly. Those drones. So you then need a full-size carrier. That's the thing. Single use and single function drones that are relatively short range, they can be small. You want to strike at something 1,000 nautical miles away from your carrier, it ain't going to be tiny. Frank Sputter. After the fall of France, what happened to New Caledonia? Seems the USN used it as a base in 42 before the French joined the Allies. These things were interesting, let's say. Many of them were dealt with by various expedited means of occupation. Bam, bam. There you go. So, The English would take it away from the Dutch long before the Americans could. If I think the question was if the Dutch managed to retain control of it. So if the Dutch did. Duckland 95. For those non-Brits in the audience, the British Parliament currently resembles a lunatic asylum. Not really that bad. There are a lot of very good parliamentarians in there. And there's a lot of very good political minds in there. A lot of very good political minds. And I think part of the trouble of our discourse these days is people automatically presume various politicians must be either stupid or on the take or various other things, when actually they're not. When you look at the opinion polls and the way they manage to work them, they seem to have their finger on the pulse more than perhaps some of the others who are held up by various portions of Twitter as being amazing. Because at the ultimate point, politics is about two things. It's about leadership and it's about electability. So you are able to be a leader. And you can't do the latter without the former, and you can't do the former without the latter. So if you're missing either one of those skills, you're just not good at politics, and you shouldn't presume you are. But guys, didn't the Korean Army conflict save the US Army and Navy from Air Force, since they were saying we could just drop nukes everywhere? Not really, because that's the strategic bombing plan had been the idea for a long time before nukes, and it hadn't worked. Getting rid of your entire fleet and that entire fleet and army only works as an idea if you're dreaming about never fighting a war again. Hi, Saturn. Counterpart, but 82, bug guy 82. I doubt that. Don't forget, MacArthur demanded using nukes and was denied. The Air Force was happy to do it. Truman not so much. Hence, the general was fired. Kahama, if it's burn or however we say it's spelled, just to turn it into a massive TNT ship and send it towards the enemy. See, it's useful while I go flying. Not sure. Franksman, does a ship at war have more stress on the hull while making normal transits compared to peacetime? Usually, a ship at war will do far more high-speed work and will take far more risks in operations. In wartime, you will operate in far more vicious seas than in peacetime you will do as if you can avoid it. So in wartime, you will take the quickest route, whereas in peacetime you'll go, hang on, there's a massive storm coming. Is it really sensible? Do we need to? We can add an extra day onto our transit, so we'll avoid it. M35 minutes. Admiral King would learn how to force choke. You know it with pure fury. That would be a skill the dark side would emulate. Jennifer, the cost of rebuilding the Victoria spiral because of failure to re-engine the ship first before reconstructing her above the waterline. Administrative stupidity. There were so many administrative stupidities in the Victoria's construction and rebuild. You can tell that the people in charge at that point were not Henderson's successors. Gentleman King. That's a good book. This was at 2 hours. Frank Sparta, that's good, and I am now 14 minutes behind. So I made up 4 minutes. Seneca, what do you think about the trope that the Navy is homosexual? There's almost so many tropes. It really doesn't matter, and frankly, I don't really ever care on those things. Look, in my experience of working with people who have been on the sharp end of things, their main question about their colleagues isn't what they have between their legs or don't have between their legs. And it certainly isn't what they fantasize about at night when they are in their bed. It's will they shoot back when the firing starts? Will they be a good battle buddy? That's the only thing that really matters in the end. Will they be able to pull their weight, and will they be a good battle buddy? If they pass the physical fitness test and they'll fight when they need to fight, then everything else is just personality. And if you consider the range of personalities that have been put up within the forces, that's not going to worry on. Ranks of Sparta. While the warships does actually show how much better one side can do if they work together. Yes, if they work together. Trying to get them to work together is fun. But guys, do you think the US should have finished and built more ships of the line, or were they a waste for the USN? Well, it depends. Who was the USN going to fight? Who were they going to fight? They're going to fight the Royal Navy? They were never going to build more than the Royal Navy was. They were never in that time going to build more than the Royal Navy was. So they're not going to win against them. And who else is going to come fight them? They could have started their wars with the Spanish early on. That could have been quite interesting. But again, the Spanish Navy, usually fairly in the age of sail, usually a bit bigger than the American one. But explain, did the Brits try to get the Australian HMAS Mellon? Nope. Would have been a game changer for the Falklands War, potentially, but no, they didn't. Thanks, Dr. C, how about a class of 20 mini Zumwalts? By mini, what do you mean? Probably expanded Zumwalts would be more sensible. Dev Squad, even a narrow gauge rail would have done wonders on Crete. Paved roads would have helped, yes. The narrow gauge railway is what I'm talking about. If you don't try and build a proper full size railway on Crete, but then building a narrow gauge railway around Crete would have been useful. Richard Orter, Blackburn made into a jet. I think I showed a picture of a aircraft which looked like a Blackburn made into a jet. Jess B. Hello, Jess B. Hi, how aggressive do you think the Russians will be when the Arctic is navigable through the summer or year access? It depends purely on how aggressive they think they can get away with. The Russians are very good at modulating their aggressiveness to see how much they can get away with. If they could push back against the Norwegians and the Scandinavian powers and Canada, they will push. If they can't, basically it depends. Does anyone else build enough icebreakers to really make it matter? They need something with larger missile magazines and 2 or more guns. Hence, an increased size Zumwalt probably is the best one to go for it. Carmen, if you go to Pembrokeshire for castles, I have 2 museums I'd like to take you to. Well, at some point I might well be doing that. Right, thank you, Stafford. Good luck with the Pargin. Runcash, so true. Dr. Clark's World of Warships is a gateway drug to naval history. Andrew Lamb was my gateway to naval history. Keep using it to draw the innocence in the name of the Blackburn. That's pretty much the plan. I like naval history and I like getting people to study it because this is going to sound strange. In my experience, naval history makes you think more. Because if you consider military history, you usually have police or gendarmes, then you have the army and you have diplomats, and they all sort of keep separately, especially on borders. Whereas at the sea, because it's both an ungovernable space and a governed space, there is a very different matter going on. There is a very different scenario. The Royal Navy is diplomat, is gendarme, is police, gendarme, and military force. It's a very learning experience studying naval history, because you also have to learn the economic, social, cultural, and you have to learn the international relations. You have to learn discussions because they all filter into what the Navy's doing. There's a reason the ship will be there. It could be economic. It could be cultural. It could be social. It could be a mixture of all three, plus international relations going on. Thank you, Staff Thompson. As long as I have my truck sorted and a new one, you and Drac will still have a new ride service waiting at ETA. That'd be useful. Thank you, Stafford. Frank Spotter, how bad could the capture of U-505 have been for the Allies if it had made public when it happened? The Germans would probably have changed their code quite quickly for the. Brain is dead. They would probably change their Enigma machine coding quite quickly in the code book they were using. And Bear Smith, if you make it to Canada, I'd make the 24-hour drive to on the hider. That'd be cool. If you're doing that, then in the nicest way, I would have to buy you dinner for that. If you're making a 24-hour drive to see me, I would have to buy you dinner. That'd seem fair. Wayne Boring, the Canadian frignauts are being called frigates for political reasons. The ships are incredibly powerful, but acknowledging that isn't politically palatable. Yes, it's like we can't call things frigates, cruisers anymore, and they're 10,000 tons. Run Cash, the issue of drones is that they can have their link hacked, but like the Iranians did, and we all know how dodgy phone signal and Wi-Fi is. They can have all sorts of things done to them. Eventually. Wayne Boren, hi, we are protecting you from the massive German battle fleet. And by the way, we have a great deal on ocean for condos in arrangement. Yeah. Okay. Frank Sweater, you mentioned close and distant escort or convoys. What is different reason? What is the difference? Which is better? You often need both. So often you will have close in will be your small anti-submarine escorts and your anti-air escorts. Your distant escort will probably be a carrier, a larger fleet carrier. You might have an escort carrier with a convoy, and probably something like battleships or heavy cruisers. And basically, they are to deal with surface raiders. If something like Scharnhorst or Tirpitz, etc., shows up, they deal with it. But they'll be covering multiple convoys. Instead of having them with every single convoy, because you don't have enough of them to have them with every single convoy, you can have them at sea, and they can be in a position whereby the convoy coming east to west and the convoy going west to east can both be covered. Whereas for dealing with submarines, for dealing with air attacks on the convoy, you need a range of destroyers, probably an escort carrier and sloop-style vessels or corvettes there to provide that sort of ring of fire and ring of protection. So that's the two different roles. And again, if I was setting up a modern warfare force these days for convoy protection, I would have a lot of it probably distributed to the merchant fleet, and I might well have a lot of uncrewed vessels making up the bulk of the escort, while there'd be a sort of a frigate or a couple of frigates as the command ships in the convoy. But I'd also have a carrier battle group centered on one of the carriers, sort of sitting in the area as the distant cover. Especially if it has airborne early warning capabilities. Ron Cash, Admiral Lee's force stroke would be so much more accurate. Yes, but he has less fury than King, so it'd be less powerful. I think King would probably be able to, through sheer fury alone, force choke at least a dozen people. If one of them wasn't an intended target, so what? Duckland95, do you think the Royal Navy will get the strike ships for the Royal Marines to use as their motherships? I think initially they're planning on using Bay class. I wouldn't be surprised if longer term strike ship evolves into an LHD to replace Albion and Bulwark. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2 to 3 of them ordered, especially if they decide that, hang on, we need to be able to guarantee we have carrier strike as well as amphibious strike. So LHDs with ski ramps. Makes sense. See which US ships of the line were used at least once in intimidating Japan. Yes, and then Japan built up a navy. Senecan era. What were the top three political naval disasters? I'm presuming I'm not allowed to say Admiral Beatty as first Sea Lord. I would say that the revolt of the admirals having to happen is a pretty much a disaster. I would say Earl Sandwich being dropped from the Admiralty at one point was a disaster for the Royal Navy. And I would say the entire 1930s for the Japanese Navy was a massive political disaster. Budguy 889, would you say the 16-inch super heavy shell made the IR a battle cruiser then, since only the Montanas were designed with the super heavy shell in mind, while the others were intended to shoot the 2,200 pound one? No, I would say the fact that the Iowas become a battleship because the Montanas aren't built. So they become called a battleship because they have better armor than anything else. But the thing is, if you're building two classes, let's put it this way, if you are building two classes of capital ship, and the one has a lot of heavy armor, is slightly slower but has bigger guns, that's your battleship probably. And the other one's orientated around armor and firepower, that's your battleship. One's orientated more around speed and firepower, that's your battle cruiser. I'm sorry, but it is. If they are in comparison, if they're not, that's why Hood can be made the case of being the first fast battleship, because the battleship equivalents of her weren't built. The Royal Navy weren't planning on building them. The Royal Navy, if you consider, if it hadn't been for Nelson and Rodney, the Royal Navy would have finished they going out of World War One. Their last capital ships completed were Renown and Repulse. Then it goes Hood, where they're ordering the admirals, and then they're ordering the G3s. They are basically building battle cruisers, and the reason for that because they're looking at a future war, and they don't think Jutland's going to happen again. They think a future war is going to be more mobile and more about maneuver and task forces around the world. In which case, it's battle cruisers you need, or fast battleships as they become. Please show Blackburn. Nope. Damn, recreating small gauge railways. One along the coast to Marlem to Sunda and Southeast, plus another going over the hills to the south side of the island. That would have been useful. And look, I used to say the most important military traits were: do I trust your judgment ability with my life, and would I trust my children's lives to your judgment ability? Yeah, that's a fairly sensible one there. Thanks, Otto. When the newest ships of ironclads and pre-dreads were built, did their navies believe or hope that they would hold on to those ships for as long as they did with sailing vessels? Not really. There might have been an idea that they would have happened, but they know things were changing far faster. Basically, the moment you get to the ironclad age, you are starting to see an increase. Everything is starting to go up like that. And it's like technology, it's going up like that. And, everything's just speeding up and speeding up and speeding up and speeding up. And to this day, navies and nations are trying to look for ways that they can slow things down, that they can keep things going, they can standardize some things. This is re-Russian Arctic aggression. That's why I hope Canada builds a far northern naval base, so we can properly base our SSKs in Arctic littorals to defend our axis. That'd be sensible. Come, my gateway into naval history is local beaches and forts, seen from a museum with a few exhibits. That's so cool. Let's put it this way, Graham Han, that Russia will more matter who is in control of Russia. The success of the current gentleman will be interesting. Don't presume any of the potential candidates for a successor for the current gentleman are going to be soft on foreign policy. None of them are going to countenance the idea of Russia losing ground on a foreign policy. It's not politically viable for them to. So Winish, very good points about naval history. When you study a ground campaign, not nearly as nuanced with all the diplomatic, political, or economic factors. That guy thinks, was the Trent affair the last time a war between US and UK actually considered? There have been other points, and you have to remember, it's when you consider, is it actually considered or actually seriously considered? Because Britain has been was maintaining war plans against America for most of probably up until probably the founding of NATO, maybe even after that. But the point is that was because planning for a war against America is planning for your worst case scenario. It makes sense. You prepare yourself by planning for your worst case scenario. Andreas Galada Garcia. Hello, Dr. Clark. Do you know any good book about naval operations and the Spanish Civil War? I do. And I've got a book review of it coming. But let's see. Where have I got it? Not that one. Is it that one? No, that's Roman Great War. That's that one. That one. Excuse me a second. Got it with me somewhere because I brought it with me because I'm going. The review's going out while I'm away. So. Yeah. There you go. Michael Albert's The Spanish Civil War at Sea. There is going to be a book or two to review coming out about this very soon. It's a good book. It's interesting. Ron Cash, I recently read the two countries with Queen Elizabeth intercepted a Chinese sub ghosting fleet. You know, it's their intercepted sub. Just curious as it can carry anti-ship missiles. I've heard similar, and I'm not going to say range because I don't think that's the sort of thing I would ever discuss publicly. Although I've heard figures suggested, but let's put it this way: it's thanks to their various Merlins doing their job. They were intercepted beyond missile range. This was written at 21:33. Your time or my time? Because my time's only 2040. Night Heron Productions. How big do you envision those LHDs being? Just out of curiosity. Also, hi, hello, Night Heron Production. Probably about 40,000 tons. Dan Freeman. RN losing the fleet earlier on? Probably not. That was BT. That was BT. Oh, I think I've caught up. Frank Smutter, is there any way to be able to find out what composition of 20mm guns were for ships, even cruisers and DDs, as the war progressed? I can only find out what they were initially armed with. The trouble is, 20mm guns you have initial figures for, and then you have the figures that they probably really carried because people would. That's up to the level at which people can start to acquire. And let's put it this way: some of the Royal Navy destroyers and cruisers we're going to see in World War II with captured Italian Army 40mm on them, which they just happened to find left near the naval yard. So, in nicest way, ships, it tends to be quite individual what anti-aircraft AA fit they had. So, all their old models were supposedly horribly noisy, so probably no worries there. And they're supposedly building quite a ones now. And the Chinese submarines are interesting. Bud Guy 818, so the Nelson class made Hood a battle cruiser. To an extent, yes. Seneca note, can you compare the tech speed in naval terms in 1890s to World War I with modern computer tech? Yeah, broadly speaking. 1890s is when things begin. Now, I will say this. I'm probably going to stop this at about about 25 minutes, about roughly 9 o'clock, because there are other people in this building and they want to go to bed. Some of them are a lot younger. So that's probably about another 20, 25 minutes. Sorry about that this evening. So not till the brew goes out, but hopefully it's been enough. I have time for a few more questions. Apparently Valiant had 2 screws and shaft damage as well as the rudder. Yep. Beat awesome. Battleship plus small tube boilers equals fast battleship. And a slightly redesigned hull. But let's put it this way: if you have the Queen Elizabeth class with making 28 knots when they've been built because they had small tube boilers, then that would mean the fast battleship would have come into existence then. It's looking good, your Buffon, Stafford Thompson. Thanks for that. 1941. What ship does the USN have that the RN would have wanted the most? In 1941, probably USS Enterprise, considering Hornet's not commissioned until the 20th of October 1941. In 1941, they would probably given anything for an extra fleet carrier, because then they could have covered Force Z. That would have been the interesting thing. If they could, they would have given anything for an aircraft carrier at that point. Declan 95, can you? And if you're asking for a single ship, it would be an aircraft carrier. For a class of ships, probably they would take the entire cruiser line. But if it's a single ship, it's probably an aircraft carrier. Declan 95, can you see the RN ever building a future sub with a Stirling engine? Yes. Every time we look in the attack subs, we look at the British tend to design a SSK or conventional sub for the role and a nuclear sub for the role. So Stirling engine they look at. And frankly, as a force multiplier, it makes sense. And let's be honest, the XLUUV could well be Stirling engine at some point, or a version could be. But as I said before, the XLUUV is a rich nation's attempt to get an SSK without admitting they're buying SSKs because they don't want to not admit they're not to buy a full fleet of SSNs because then they worry they will lose their SSNs and they need them. Bud Guy 8829. If no Pearl Harbor, how did the USN get on a plan on sailing in force through the Philippines when the US didn't have the oilers for the Guadalcanal campaign? Let's put it this way: the Americans didn't really have a plan on that one. They try. They'd probably find some oilers somewhere. Wayne Boring, have you ever considered writing a book about Legend? I have to admit, I did consider it when I was reading 2 books. There's a book or 2 to review coming out this week. which is the two better books on Battle of Jutland, then yes. And Iron Productions, were there Renowns and Hood for that matter? Boilers, small tube boilers? Yes. Pleasure, Sal. There's got to be 100 books about Jutland already. Yes, but none of them are written by me, and there's... I think the book I would write about Jutland would be what was Jutland's real impact on future warfare. Jutland an impact, because it's basically Jutland's an end. It's an end to the idea of these battles of line of battle, and it's the last battle where you can really consider it linking to the Age of Sail in terms of that scenario. John Hargrave. Oh, thank you, Jim Curson. Dan Freeman. Okay, let's see. Most ships, most of your ships have a good naming history, and we use plenty of battles against other countries for ship names. So it can't be too thing. Harmon, what one ship class would the RN-USN gain most by training? What one ship class would they gain most by trading? That's an interesting one. Numbers-wise, any class the British trade with the Americans would be helpful, but gain most by trading. There are ones which are a gain for the Americans and ones which are gains for the Brits, but there's no one which is a class which would be a mutual gain for each. Because the Brits cruisers, for example, you could exchange the British town class cruisers for some of the American cruisers, which would be a gain for the Americans because they'd be really useful long range cruisers for them. But for the Americans and Brits, that's not really any help because the Brits need the town class as well. Interestingly enough, I'd be almost tempted to say courageous and glorious for Saratoga and Lexington. Now, there's a reason for this, because if the Americans have an experience of operating a small fleet carrier earlier on, it will shoot that idea in the foot, and the Americans will not have to go through the embarrassing experience of all the various little ships they try and build as aircraft carriers at various points. They will just never go that again. And for the British, with Saratoga and Lexington as their two carriers instead of courageous and glorious, then interesting enough, Scharnhorst and Eisenhower might have kept away from them. Those 8-inch guns might have scared the bejesus out of them. John Henry agrees. The Chinese have some interesting technology research, and the recent papers I've seen, whether they can achieve the use practically at the moment is another kettle of fish. It is always a very different kettle of fish. There's also the fact that I sometimes treat what the Chinese claim with a pinch of salt for two reasons. When they're talking about their stuff they have in service, I think they probably underplay its capabilities. And when they talk about the stuff they're developing, I think sometimes they overplay its capabilities because both of those work for them as a strategic plan. Why did Mountbatten want to take the USN light carriers for ops in the Pacific? Operation Zipper. Mountbatten is just, we'd just leave it on Mountbatten. Juicy decision. If John Hargrove, sorry, this is about stuff on submarines. I thought it was. And they're working on supercavitation to an extent like the Russians to try and hide their submarines in air bubble pockets. It'd be an interesting one. This decision. If 4C has a carrier, how does that change Japanese strategy? Do they have to abandon some advances? If the Japanese force gets, let's be honest, if a carrier's there, then the Royal Navy probably has at least a light cruiser or a couple of light cruisers there as well, and some destroyers with that force. So it's a full task force. It has probably a cat flying up, and they'll coordinate better with the land-based aircraft as well, because it'd be like in the Mediterranean. In which case, they will use the groups to defend the cat. That might well cut off the sea resupply and sea movement of forces for the Japanese, which might mean they have to send heavier forces south. So that's the thing. They probably have to send a heavier force south, which might delay the attack a bit. Might. And might allow Abda to form up earlier and do some fighting earlier. Look, I'm glad to hear that, Nook. Frank's panel. How many naval battles were fought beyond line of sight? Basically, start off with World War II and carry on. There are many, many battles which are fought beyond line of sight. Any which involve carriers are usually beyond line of sight. Alternate history. Power and still will swap places. What happens next? Let's put it this way: Patton would be a lot more aggressive than Stilwell was. He was also, in Mace's way, even more virulently anti-communist. So goodness knows what they'd have got up to versus Mao's forces then. Bad guy 889. Do you think that our class should have gotten the 18-inch 47 caliber guns instead of 1650s? No, because that would have delayed them even longer. But it would have been cool. Don Giovanni, would gas turbines be useful in 1920s on design battleships? Yes, they would give you even more dense power supply. Frank's mother, how was Kirby cured? By having vegetables available. But Anak, you're right. The metallurgy wasn't really advanced enough for reliable gas turbines, but they also hadn't had a reason to develop it. They did have some very advanced metallurgy going on. Remember their guns being developed at that point. So, yes, they could have probably done it if they thought gas power was available and gas turbines were available, which requires development of the jet engine a little bit earlier. But Guy 829, would the US be a better off or worse off if 11 of their 15 capital ships were made up of Lexington battlecruisers and the first South Dakota class? They'd be better off. They'd probably be facing far stronger enemies, because nicest way, if that was what the Americans got that at treaties, then I cannot imagine the British don't have the G3s at least wandering around. And goodness knows what the Japanese got allowed. Trentlenko. Why did Mountbatten want to take USN light carriers for ops in the Pacific? Operation Zipper, precisely. Operation Zipper needed air cover. CVEs were marginal versus kamikazes. Everything's marginal versus kamikazes until you're up to a full armored carrier. And even then, they don't really want to take a lot of hits. Hello, Hellshot. So about another 10 minutes. Would the USN lose a carrying World War II if they had RN-class armored carriers? It would be far, far more difficult. I think far more interesting would be as if they'd built the Midway class instead of the Essex. If they'd been building a Midway Storm rather than Essex Storm, I think that would have been slightly slower production, but that would have given them a very, very powerful fleet. Frank's one. So apparently the king of Greece died of a monkey bite, and this leads to the Turkish Revolution 100 years ago. History never stops being weird. No, history is stranger than fiction. It's like every time someone was telling me that Game of Thrones was so out there and so random, I was going, have you read a history book? They'd still lose carriers to torpedo hits. Yes, they would. The torpedo hits. But those were far less. Night Heron Productions. With regards to British presence in the Pacific region in late 1941, that would be more better for the RN. Having a larger fleet force based out of Ceylon, that was known about, or a larger. What would be better for the RN? Having a larger force based out of Ceylon, that was known about, or a large force based there whose true size and capability was not known to the IGN. They would want they would want a force known about being there, but they'd like it to be. They'd like the Japanese to be not quite sure how it was better. This is the thing. This is where the R class come in particularly handy, because from a distance they look close enough to the Queen Elizabeth class in sort of design and layout that if you have them pottling around with a couple of Queen Elizabeth class battleships out there and a King George V and a Renown or Repulse, then you have a significant fleet. And this is why I tend to push them back and go, look, we should have been forming up Force Z. We should have been forming up basically a Far East fleet in Ceylon, not at the Singapore. So it could be organized from Ceylon and could pulse from there to Singapore. Document 95. Who has the current best African navy? Probably Egypt or South Africa. Libya and Algeria tends to have a fairly decent force, and so does Nigeria, but they tend to be smaller. It's usually South Africa used to be a lot better than it is, so it's probably Egypt is the best navy in Africa. See, when fall of the Ottomans was inevitable after World War I. The fall of the Ottomans was inevitable from about 1890. Cal Harmon, armored carriers are a bit more tanky and good for morale. You see it hit and keep trucking. Much better than hit and sink or burst in fire. Howshot, then would you put Essex class where the Yorktown starts historically? I would say the Essex class are a continuation of the Yorktown. I would say the Essex class, in many ways, are a bid to make the Yorktowns quicker and easier to produce. And I would say the Midways start from Yorktowns and include some British armoured carrier doctrine. But there again, you have to remember, no one is stupid. The Americans go for the unarmored carriers because under the treaty system, they need to they want to build carriers with a maximum air group because of their idea of fighting in the Pacific. The British go for the armored carriers because they're trying to fight the world over and they're trying to deal with fighting in the Pacific and fighting in the Mediterranean and fighting in the North Sea. So the Americans are building really for a war against the Japanese, in which case you can build for that war, and that's the carrier you build for that war. Under the treaty system, when you've got a tonnage limitation. If you're the British and you're in the war in the Pacific is going to be the other side of the world from your infrastructure base, if you're going to be possibly fighting in the train against the Italians or fighting against the Germans, and you therefore have the whole world to do, you tend to go the armored carrier route. Because the thing is, you need your carriers working on day 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because in the Mediterranean, there isn't the space to hide. So you need to think these things through. So that explains the entire differences in the doctrine development. No one is being stupid. No one is making the wrong decision. They're making the best decision for them. And this is why it gets annoying when people start going, this Navy doesn't understand air power, they're doing this or they're doing this. And you sit there and go, no, they do understand air power, they're doing something very sensible, they're doing what's sensible for them. Bad Guy 69. What was a better setup? The US single 5-inch spread out along a carrier or the British setup of the twin turrets in the corners of the carrier? I personally prefer the British one because it tends to concentrate fire and allows you to have that fire orientated and controlled slightly more easier, but the single 5-inch does have the advantage of being theoretically more survivable in terms of impact on the ship. So there's force and against for both of them, and again, depends on what you're doing. Frank Sposano, do we know of any more accurate ancient maps? You recently showed an old Roman map of the world. Maps of Rome? There are a fair number of them wandering around. There are some good ones. They're not really that accurate, but they're accurate by their standards. Dan Freeman, until Britain went to war with Japan, politically, could the RN move their base from Singapore to Ceylon? Would that not risk unhappiness in Hong Kong, and with the pounds-related powers that be? Yes, they could because they already maintained a base in Trincomalee, and their excuse to be quite simple: we're building the Eastern Fleet on Mediterranean on Ceylon just in case it needs to go to support the Mediterranean Fleet. So basically, the reason you'd say is, look, we can't put it the other side in the ocean from the Mediterranean. So putting it halfway between the Med and the Singapore, so it can move from that, and the halfway point is roughly Trincomalee. Thank you for the live stream. No, it's fine. I enjoy doing them. Trust me, I love doing these live streams. That's why I do them wherever I wander around when I can. Bud Guy 8829. Did the US have any air plans to counter HMS? Any plans to counter HMS Warrior? No, because really, when the British built HMS Warrior, that was well beyond the US plans. And during the Civil War, their probable theory was if the British ironclad squadron turns up, we're in a lot of trouble. They started building some ocean-going ironclads themselves, which might have been their answer, but yeah. How much of an answer they would have been is a different matter. Thanks. In the case of armored carriers having few aircraft, what was the best plane to use on them? Probably the British went the right way. They went with a fighter type and a strike type. So that's what they went with. But guy, how did the Hellcats and Corsairs do in Europe? I don't think the Corsairs were used that much in Europe, but I think some Hellcats were, and they did quite well. Mainly in the Mediterranean. But usually it's more Wildcats, and the British tended to use the Wildcats and Seafires and those sort of aircraft in the Mediterranean Atlantic theaters, and they tend to use Hellcats and Corsairs in the Far East and Pacific. Next one. It's nice to know that some museums like being vandalized with accuracy. I don't tend to vandalize them. I tend to just point out issues. Occasionally, I have been known to walk around, make recordings, and go and sit with the curator for a bit. Other times, there's not much to worry about. And sometimes I'm just in a museum, which is just good. Right then, any last questions? Because it's about a couple minutes. Take care, Dr. 95. Hope you have a nice evening. And to be fair, I am almost out of Iron Brew. I think I've got about 3 more flutes of it. I'll do tomorrow morning's recording of Build Trumps. Not quite, but as I said, there are small people who are going to sleep in this building, so I need to. There's a limit. They don't like me going too late. They don't mind me doing it, but I don't want to go too late and keep them up. Professor Wilson, how would you modernize a deflinger to keep it viable World War II? Small tube boilers, and if I had my way, I would standardize a dual-purpose secondary battery, take out its existing battery, and fit in as many dual-purpose secondaries as I could. Knowing the Germans, though, they would want to stick in the perfect AA gun and the perfect secondary anti-ship gun, so it'd be a mixed secondary battery, but that's really stupid. Hello, Lucas. Josh, thank you. Thank you for being here. Frank Swallow, thank you. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Peter Dawson, were Corsairs using attacks on Tirpitz? I don't think so. Let me just check. Victorious used albacore torpedo bombers in March 1942. The Royal Navy did use Hellcats on Operation Tungsten, when 40 Barracuda dive bombers and 80 fighters, mostly Hellcats it seems, attacked. Again, Hellcats were used in Operation Brawn. Corsairs were used in Operation Mascot. Yeah. And Goodwood. So yeah, Corsairs were used. That's interesting. Jennifer, I can't see an Essex-class carrier surviving the Mediterranean theatre of war, having read about damage caused to armor carriers. Yeah, that would have been a bit of a problem for them. Night night, Alfie Rowe. Night night. And thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Trent Lincoln. Thank you, and chat to you tomorrow, Trent. Thank you, Lucas Jench. Hope you had a nice time. Thank you, DGB40, M35 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Dirt Squad. As I said, people build the best carriers for them, and there is nothing wrong or bad in any particular design. It's silly when people start putting these things together and going, oh, there's got to be a right or wrong answer. There often isn't. When we are talking about naval operations, when we are talking about shit, it's what's the best answer for you. Yes, so there is therefore a right and wrong answer, but it's what's right for you, not necessarily what is right on a national scale. The best aircraft carrier you can build at the moment for the United States Navy is probably the Ford class. But you'd actually probably want a mixture of Ford and something smaller to give them numbers. But if you were building for the Royal Navy, if you build a Ford, that'd be incredibly crew intensive, and it wouldn't be suitable for the Royal Navy. It just wouldn't be. You'd build the Queen Elizabeth class. For building the Queen Elizabeth class for the Americans, they'd be going, what do we do with this? Right, thank you much, Aaron, and take care. As said, if you like the videos, please like, share, subscribe. There's a little button down there which you value press. Again, there is a link to Discord down below. There's also a link to joining the channel if you would like an extra emoji produced. That's why I'm free short for that emoji. And if you're interested in helping me win my bet with my aunt, please do share the channel. Please do join the channel, subscribe to the channel, because as you know, if I get to 13,000 subscribers, then the Blackburn face masks from the Spreadshirt site, where you can also find this lovely hat, will be a picture of them wearing them, will be produced on the 2nd of January in Bruships. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Take care, and probably see you all tomorrow at Armchair Admirals, which hopefully will work like this night's hat. Take care, everyone. Thank you.